Friday. Reflecting on an American legend.
John Wayne had it too, you know. He was a man of the Middle West. They were men of the earth.
We'll speak with those who were close to our 40th president. Now, remembering Ronald Reagan, a special edition of Judy Woodruff's Inside Politics, live from the U.S. Capitol.
Welcome back. Preparations are all but complete here in Washington for the nation's first state funeral in more than 3 decades. The body of former President Ronald Reagan is expected to arrive outside Washington by plane just about 1 hour from now. After a funeral procession, the former president's casket will be placed in the Capitol Rotunda. It will be the 10th president to be so honored. Tonight, members of the public who have been gathering throughout this day will be allowed to view the president's casket. CNN's Bruce Morton has more on the events of the next several hours.
The big jet will land at Andrews Air Force Base in suburban Maryland about 5 p.m. Eastern Time. They'll offload the casket into a hearse. Mrs. Reagan and her party will board limousines, and they'll head for Washington at about 5:20. At 16th Street and Constitution Avenue, right behind the White House, where the Reagans lived for 8 years, they'll stop and transfer the casket to a horse-drawn caisson. By about 6 o'clock, they'll be headed for the Capitol. Workers there have been cleaning up the catafalque on which the casket will rest. It was first used in Abraham Lincoln's funeral. As the caisson approaches the Capitol, the crowd will hear "Hail to the Chief," the president's song, then a 21-gun salute, 5 seconds between shots, and then a flyover. Then they'll carry the casket up the steps. It's the west front, and it has lots of steps, and the casket empty weighs 450 pounds. So there are 3 9-man teams to share the work of carrying it. They've practiced. Inside, there'll be a funeral ceremony in the rotunda. George Washington, among others, will watch from the dome. The president's head will be on the east side. The stars on the flag will be over his heart. It's a VIP-only service, congressmen and so on, and Mrs. Reagan's party, 65 to 70 people with her, they say. And there'll be 3 speakers: Ted Stevens of Alaska, the President Pro Tem of the Senate, Dennis Hastert, Speaker of the House, and Vice President Richard Cheney. The service will be short, 25 to 30 minutes. Then the family will have some private time with the casket. And then, probably around 8:30 or 9 p.m., they'll open the doors and let ordinary citizens file through to pay their respects. Some of them have been waiting in line since dawn to do that. Bruce Morton, CNN, Washington.
A lot of people already waiting in line. Ronald Reagan's final return to Washington actually began this morning at his presidential library in California, where more than 100,000 people paid their respects over the last 2 days. CNN's Thelma Gutierrez is standing by with more from Simi Valley. Hello again, Thelma.
Hi there, Judy. After 2 days of public viewing here at the library, there was a private ceremony early this morning. It was closed to the public. Even so, there were dozens of people down below at the entrance of the library that lined the streets waiting to catch a glimpse of the procession. The 13-vehicle motorcade carrying family members and honorary pallbearers pulled up to the library early this morning. Nancy Reagan and the president's 3 children accompanied her, along with their spouses and children. After a few moments inside the library, the procession returned outside. 8 armed forces members carried the solid mahogany flag-draped coffin to the hearse as the band played "America the Beautiful." The family stood near the hearse as the coffin was placed inside. They returned to their cars to begin a 25-mile drive to Point Mugu Naval Air Station, where there was a simple departure ceremony, and then the former president's body was placed aboard a presidential aircraft, a 747, to be flown to the nation's capital. And now we are looking at live pictures from a makeshift memorial at the entrance to the library. We will be doing that shortly. There it is. We will look at the live pictures from makeshift memorial at the entrance. When we first arrived on Saturday, Judy, there were just a few bouquets, and now you can see that it has grown to this size with wreaths, bouquets, cards, and flags, even jelly beans. We noticed some mourners had placed flowers in boots, cowboy boots. Judy, back to you.
Thelma, thank you very much. A much bigger crowd, I think, even than the most, the smartest experts had been able to predict The numbers exceeded all expectations. Thank you very much, Thelma. Well, President Bush is not attending today's funeral ceremony for Ronald Reagan. He is hosting the G8 summit at Sea Island, Georgia. Just a short while ago, he welcomed a group of Middle Eastern leaders, including Iraq's interim president, to the meeting. The United States plans to hand over power to that new interim government on June 30th. Earlier, Mr. Bush called on NATO to take a bigger role in post-war Iraq.
We believe NATO ought to be involved. We will work with our NATO friends to at least continue the role that now exists and hopefully expand it somewhat. There's going to be some constraints, obviously. A lot of NATO countries are not in a position to commit any more troops. We fully understand that. But I do think NATO ought to stay involved. And I think we have a good chance of getting that done.
Joining me now with his take on the G8 summit, on Ronald Reagan and other matters, Samuel Berger. He was the senior advisor, or is the senior advisor to the Kerry campaign. He's also former national security advisor in the Clinton administration. Samuel Berger, first of all, now we have George W. Bush talking about bringing NATO troops to Iraq. This was something John Kerry had been urging him to do, but you have the president of France, Jacques Chirac, saying today he thinks it's not a good idea.
Well, I think the fact that the president is moving towards trying to build international support for this enterprise is a bit of good news in an otherwise sad day today, Judy. This is something that Senator Kerry and others of us have been arguing for 18 months, that we need to empower the Iraqi people. We need to bring greater international support to the effort. If the president is now coming to that view, so much the better.
If indeed the handover works as the Bush administration is saying they believe it will, you're now getting the international community on board. The UN Security Council unanimously passed a resolution yesterday. Does this in effect take Iraq off the table as an issue in this campaign for John Kerry?
The real challenge is what happens on the ground. The UN resolution is a good development. It's a good step. At least we're now heading in the right direction on a one-way street rather than the wrong direction. But the challenges are on the ground. Are we going to be able to get more troops and resources from our allies? Is there going to be a legitimate and genuine transfer of authority to Iraqis so they believe they have real ownership over their future? Is there going to be a political process that can lead to elections and a constitution that provides for the kind of stability that will enable us to withdraw our troops from Iraq? So the real challenges are on the ground. The fact that the president is now coming to the view that's been expressed by Senator Kerry for 18 months in an unrelenting way is something that is welcome.
But my question is, does this mean there's much less there for John Kerry to criticize?
Well, we want to succeed in Iraq. I think all Americans want us to succeed in Iraq. So to the extent things go better in Iraq, if Iraq is sidelined as an issue, so much the better. No American wants to see 15 Iraqis killed as they were yesterday in Iraq, continued violence. We've got to have security. We've got economic reconstruction and a political process. But there's a lot of work lying in front of us. And I hope that the rhetorical changes that we've seen in the last few days now really translate to changes on the ground.
Last question, Samuel Berger, as someone who's a student of foreign policy, how did Ronald Reagan change America's role in the world?
Well, I think he came along at a time when Americans really appreciated and relished his optimism, his spirit of confidence. In many ways, he embodied what Americans, he was a mirror that we held up to ourselves, and he embodied that spirit of confidence and optimism and the desire of American people for leadership. There were plenty of issues on which I disagreed with him, but I don't think there's anybody who questions today that he made Americans feel confident about the future.
You live in Washington. What are you thinking as you watch these services?
Well, I think the outpouring is quite extraordinary and says a good deal about the impact that President Reagan had on the American people. Obviously a very deep and abiding one. It says Washington rises to the occasion when ceremonies like this, sad as they are, take place. And I think it says, most importantly, that the American people appreciate leadership.
Samuel Berger, who was National Security Advisor to President Bill Clinton, we thank you very much for coming by. Thanks. Okay. And still ahead, how will history remember the 40th American president? We're going to hear from an historian and Reagan biographer. Also, a former White House social secretary looks back at the glamorous side of Ronald and Nancy Reagan. And close Reagan family friend, entertainer Merv Griffin, shares his thoughts on the former president.
Roses are red, violets are blue. Splenda is sweet, and so are you.
Almost anywhere you use sugar, you can use Splenda. The no-calorie sweetener that's made from sugar, so it tastes like sugar. And you can even bake with it. Splenda is a very good reason to do something sweet for the ones you love.
If a lunar rover can get out of a ditch on the moon, if a tugboat can tow an enormous freighter, if an M1 tank can have a heavy-duty Allison transmission, then why can't your truck? At GMC, our engineers don't just ask questions, they have answers. The GMC Sierra line of pickups. Professional-grade engineering. It's not more than you need, just more than you're used to.
Sarah, you know that summer home you've always dreamed of building here?
Yeah. What about it?
Well, I've been thinking. If we juggle some things in the portfolio, I think we could make that happen a little sooner than we thought.
Oh, wow. That would be great. Hon, what do you think?
Sweet.
When you work with a Morgan Stanley financial advisor, you get someone unusually devoted to your dreams. One client at a time.
You want another bud?
No thanks.
Oh, gotta take this. Watch my beer.
I'd like to see what's going on under that label of yours. Sometimes when I'm drinking my bud, I pretend it's you with all that flavor. You know, a lot of guys don't understand cold filtering. What's up, Kenny? But I know how smooth you are. I'm breaking it off with my beer for you. Maybe I'll just take a little taste right now and then... What?
By Mystic River on DVD. It's a masterpiece. On over 145 critics' top 10 lists. 6 major Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, and winner of 2 Academy Awards. Mystic River. Buy it today.
Thank heaven, thank heaven. One chocolatey Viactive soft calcium chew. Twice, every day, gives you 100% of the calcium you need. So, you can be sweet to your bones and yourself.
CNN Sunday, a special television event. Meet the men who changed history on D-Day.
It was mostly a fight for survival.
Their stories, their words. Paul Azan hosts D-Day, A Call to Courage, a CNN special event, Sunday, 7 Eastern.
Someone who knew the Reagans from a very different perspective was their social secretary to Nancy Reagan while they were in the White House. She is Gail Burt. She joined the White House staff in 1983. Gail Burt, good to see you.
Good to see you, Judy.
First of all, and I know you're leaving shortly to go to the state funeral at the Capitol. You know, I want to ask you, how much did the Reagans really like the city of Washington? In a way, this city represented It does represent the federal government. That was something Ronald Reagan had criticized for many years.
It did, but you know, they made a lot of friends here in Washington, personal friends who have remained personal friends with them over the last 20 years since they left. They didn't know many people when they came here, but they set about to get to know this town and to like this town. And of course, Washington is multifaceted and complex, but they rolled with it. And they had friends in the media, as you know, and Kay Graham was one of Mrs. Reagan's best friends, and they remained that way until Mrs. Graham's death several years ago.
Of course, the late chairman of the Washington Post Company, formerly publisher of the Washington Post. Gail, who else would you say were among the friends, the people they like to spend time with in this city?
They had some very close friends. Their cabinet was very close to them. A lot of them had come from California, but others like Matt Baldridge, Cap Weinberger, George Shultz, they really enjoyed spending time with them. They loved having people up to Camp David. They love having people come up for the weekend to Camp David and watch movies with them and just to unwind. And you know, 20 years is a long time, and a lot of these people are here or not here, but they did 8 years allows you to put some real roots down, and they did in this city.
Gail Burt, we are just about to go to some comments at Sea Island. Very quickly, a final few seconds of comments about Nancy Reagan's relationship with her husband.
Well, it was, you know, his faults were her strengths and vice versa, and they were almost two halves that made one whole, and they complemented
Gail
each
Burt,
other.
we're going to have to leave it there. We thank you so much for taking the time to come over. We now have some video of President Bush's comments in Sea Island with the Iraqi interim president.
This has been a special day for me and those of us in my administration who are here, because I really never thought I'd be sitting next to an Iraqi president of a free country a year and a half ago. And here you are. Not only are you here to visit with me, and we've had a wonderful talk, but you're here to talk to the leadership of the G8, leaders of the free world. And I am so grateful you were here. Please convey my best wishes to your Prime Minister as well. Yesterday, the United Nations sent a clear message that the world supports a free Iraq, and the United States supports a transfer of full sovereignty to you, Mr. President, and your government. And having visited with you, having talked to you, and having listened to you, I have got great faith in the future of your country, because you believe in the hopes and aspirations of the Iraqi people. It's been a proud day for me, and I'm glad you're here.
First of all, I'd like to, on behalf of the Iraqi people, to thank you for giving us this chance to attend the G8 summit, where, again, thanks to the American people for the leadership of President George Bush, without which we couldn't have been here into the G8. Mr. President, I'd like to express to you the commitment of the Iraqi people to move toward democracy. We are moving in a steady steps toward it. We're determined to have a free, democratic, federal Iraq, a country that is a source of stability to the Middle East, which is very important for the rest of the world. Again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank the American people for the sacrifices that the brave men and women of the United States endured trying to liberate Iraq. We're working with all our hearts to make sure that all these sacrifices of the Iraqis, as well as our friends in the coalition, will not go to avail, that all these will be to the benefit of the Iraqi public. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you all.
The interim president of Iraq, Sheikh Ghazi al-Yawar, thanking President Bush and the American people for the sacrifices Americans have made in his countries, and also telling the president he has the commitment of the Iraqi people to democracy. Well, in the days since President Reagan died, Americans have been looking back at his life and his career. Coming up, a look at the Reagan legacy and the former president's place in history.
Today, join CNN for evening-long coverage of the state funeral of Ronald Reagan, followed by a Larry King Live exclusive with George and Barbara Bush. Starts today, 4:30 Eastern.
To help Sea Swirl celebrate its 50th year in Oregon, Hayden Island Yacht Center and Sea Swirl are committed to sell over 50 new Sea Swirls by the 4th of July. That means open bow starting at just $170 a month. Striper Sportfish start at just $237 a month. Whether this is your first boat or you want to trade in your old boat, now's the time. Hayden Island Yacht Center, we've got your boat. Come in and get it.
Comcast is
for kids.
Watch redecoration in action when kids trade rooms on Trading Spaces on the Discovery Kids channel. Toon Disney takes you away to fun and adventure in the wild with Timon and Pumbaa. And tune into Nickelodeon for everyday fun with the life and times of Little Bill.
Whatever you're into,
it's on Comcast.
Exclusive President George H.W. and Barbara Bush on Ronald Reagan, Larry King, CNN 9 Eastern.
With me now, historian Robert Dallek, who has written a biography of Ronald Reagan. On this day, we remember the nation's 40th president. Robert Dallek, what about these state funeral like the one we are going to see today? Yes. How many have there been? How are they special?
Well, they are special, Judy, and there have only been 10 presidential state funerals. Many presidents didn't want them. Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, FDR, Truman never had state funerals. There have been 4 state funerals for assassinated presidents, Abraham Lincoln and McKinley, and of course John Kennedy, James Garfield in the 19th century. And I think it was very important to the nation to have that experience because there was a lot of grief, a lot of mourning, a lot of sort of feeling of hurt over the fact that a president had been, his life had been taken. But there were 6 others now, including Reagan, who had these state funerals, including Warren G. Harding and Taft and Dwight Eisenhower, most recently, of course, Lyndon Johnson. And so it's a moment when the nation, in a sense, comes together. It is full of symbolism about the American experience, about what it means, I think, to be an American. And I think this is particularly true now with this Ronald Reagan funeral. Particularly in the more casual era that we live in. Yes. Robert Dallek, how do you explain what appears to be a cross-section of an outpouring for Ronald Reagan? He clearly was very conservative in his political views, in some ways divisive, although some would say not as divisive as this current president has been. How do you explain the outpouring for Ronald Reagan? Well, Judy, I think a lot of that goes just to this point that the current administration has been divisive, and there's been so many sour notes about our politics over the last several years. And I think there's not so much a sense of grieving over Reagan currently, though of course there's always grief when a president dies. But I think he's inspirited the country. I think people are reaching back to his administration and to the feelings he generated of shared purpose, shared values, mourning in America, the pride is back. And I think this is what animates people on both sides of the aisle, be they Democrats, Republicans, Independents. I think they are drawn to his memory as a way to have a kind of shared feeling about this country. I don't know how much you've given thought to this. How uniquely American is something like what we're going to witness today and over the next few days? Well, there are state funerals in other countries, but I think it is very much an American experience, an American kind of tradition. What you have, of course, the flag is so much in evidence, the horseless rider, the planes flying over, and of course television now. This, of course, goes back to John Kennedy and the fact that the nation can share in the whole experience in a way it never could when Franklin Roosevelt died. Of course, they had radio, but television has been so instrumental in creating a kind of shared memory and shared current experience. And it is very much, I think, a kind of American experience. You're going to be watching, I'm assuming, over these next few days? I will indeed.
Robert Dallek, historian and biographer of Ronald Reagan. Thank you very much for coming by. We appreciate it.
My pleasure, Judy.
All right. Well, he is close to the Reagan family, and he's offering his comfort during their time of grief. Coming up, we're going to hear from entertainer Merv Griffin and what he had to say a year ago about his close friend, Ronald Reagan.
One chocolatey Viactive soft calcium chew, twice every day, gives you 100% of the calcium you need. So you can be sweet to your bones and yourself.
It can think for itself, strike fear in the hearts of hackers, and laugh in the face of disaster. It can transform itself, grow into whatever the future demands. Work virtually anywhere, and propel entire companies, industries, and economies forward. Can your network do this? It can if it's designed by the world's networking company, AT&T.
I'm George W. Bush, and I approve this message. I'm optimistic about America because I believe in the people of America.
After recession, 9/11, and war, now our economy has been growing for 10 straight months. The largest tax relief in history. 1.4 million jobs added since August. Inflation, interest, and mortgage rates low. Record home ownership. John Kerry's response? He's talking about the Great Depression. One thing sure, pessimism never created a job.
Do you have the right truck? The best-selling half-ton regular and extended cab is now available as a crew cab. It's got more standard horsepower, more torque, and more towing capacity than Ford or Dodge half-ton crews. Introducing the new Silverado half-ton crew. It's the right truck from Chevy.
If you're thinking about refinancing your mortgage to lower your monthly payments or to cash out equity, call or click on to Ditech.com. Right now, Ditech is offering a $395 flat fee home loan with 0 points that may save you thousands of dollars in closing costs. Let Ditech take the mystery out of lender closing costs. Get the $395 flat fee home loan from Ditech.com. Just call 1-800-DITECH-1 or apply online at Ditech.com.
I never let my friends down. I never let myself down. I'm a friend, a brother, a diabetic. This is my meter.
The new AccuCheck compact system. No strip handling, finger or forearm test. Faster results. AccuCheck. Live life. We'll fit in.
A short time from now, Ronald Reagan's body will arrive here at the United States Capitol. 200,000 mourners, perhaps more, expected to file past the casket to pay their respects as Reagan's body lies in state. As the Reagans' family mourns, they do have close friends to lean on. Among them, entertainer Merv Griffin, chosen as an honorary pallbearer. He shared with me some of his thoughts on Ronald Reagan in an interview I did with him last summer.
Well, he kept that kind of Jimmy Stewart, even though Jimmy wasn't Midwestern, but that wonderful Midwestern attitude. John Wayne had it too, you know. He was a man of the Middle West, even though his name was Marion, which we used to kid him about a lot. There was an earthiness. They were men of the earth, and they all gravitated to the Republican Party. It was, they were very patriotic and loved America and loved the flag.
Entertainer Merv Griffin, a close friend of Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan, chosen as one of the 5 honorary pallbearers. Well, that's it for this special edition of Inside Politics. I'm Judy Woodruff. I'll be here reporting live from the Capitol throughout the rest of this afternoon and into the evening. CNN's special report of the state funeral of President Ronald Reagan starts right now.
This is CNN's live coverage of the state funeral of President Ronald Reagan. Reporting from Washington, Wolf Blitzer and Paula Zahn.
Good afternoon from Washington, this capital city, which has seen more than 200 years of historic events and memorable personalities, is once again ready to witness an event for the ages.
And along these famous streets and inside the city's majestic buildings, we the people are preparing to say our final farewell to Ronald Reagan. It is a warm, stifling day out there, one with the timeless feel of an early summer here in the South.
And over the next few hours and days, we'll see things that have not been witnessed for a generation in this country, not since the state funeral of the former President Lyndon Johnson in 1973. For others, the pictures and the sounds of these next few hours will bring to mind the black and white images of President John F. Kennedy's funeral way back in 1963.
And for a few, it'll bring back memories of the farewell to President Roosevelt back in 1945. The plane carrying the late president's body, as well as the members of his family, will be arriving soon. The presidential jet will land at Andrews Air Force Base, which is in the city's Maryland suburbs.
At Andrews, Ronald Reagan's flag-draped casket will be transferred to a hearse for the motorcade into the nation's capital. The motorcade goes along Suitland Road and the Suitland Parkway to Interstate 295, north to the 11th Street Bridge, then along I-395, actually going into Virginia. That way, it will arrive over the Memorial Bridge over the Potomac River, right near the Lincoln Memorial, for those of you familiar with the nation's capital. The motorcade then proceeds along Constitution Avenue to 16th Street, that's near the White House, and the Washington Monument, where the casket will be transferred to a horse-drawn caisson. Next comes the solemn procession of the horse-drawn caisson along Constitution Avenue up to the west front. That's right, the west front of the U.S. Capitol building. From there, the casket will be carried up to the Capitol Rotunda.
And we're going to backtrack now about 1.5 miles from the Capitol Rotunda, where we find Gene Meserve, who's standing by at the ellipse. That's the point at which the casket will be transferred to a caisson. Gene, how many people have gathered? We know it's going to be a tough day out for anybody sensitive to the heat.
Well, the crowds have grown markedly over the last couple of hours. I would say people are now standing probably 6 or 7 deep along the rope line here on Constitution Avenue, where that transfer will take place with such an appropriate backdrop, the White House. The caisson onto which the casket will be moved was built in 1918 to haul howitzer cannons. It has been refurbished to carry heavy caskets. When it begins to move down Constitution Avenue, it will be followed by the presidential colors and a riderless black horse. His name is Sergeant York. He's a standardbred who failed as a racehorse and has found a second career in these sorts of ceremonies. On that horse's back, a saddle, in the stirrups, riding boots of Ronald Reagan backwards, a symbol of a fallen warrior. Now, officials are very anxious to see this part of the ceremony go well, so anxious that just a couple of hours ago there were road crews here patching up the road in back of me. Officials were worried that uneven pavement might trip up some of the pallbearers as they tried to move that very heavy casket. The crowds, as I mentioned, have been growing. I've talked to people who've driven here from Tennessee, from Michigan. There are tourists, there are local people who live near Washington. Many of them supported Ronald Reagan, but some of them did not. Nonetheless, they have come here to pay their respects to the man and to the office, and also to witness history. Paula, Wolf, back to you.
Gene, arrangements have been made to accommodate as many as 250,000 people paying the respects to the president over the next 48 hours or so. Give us a sense of the level of security in place.
Well, it's very high. This has been designated as a national special security event. That means the Secret Service has been coordinating with dozens of state and local and federal agencies to secure this. As you know already, the airspace around Washington has been secured, but we have seen bike racks go on here along Constitution Avenue. There will be rows of military along the street and rows of police. The crowd is going to be able to see, they will be able to see this ceremony as it goes past, but definitely security very much here in place, here in the nation's capital. A lot of it we can't see. There are snipers on rooftops, there are surveillance cameras, but some of it will be very obvious as this day moves forward. Paula, back to you.
Thanks, Jane.
Gene, thanks very much. Anderson Cooper is also along this route. He's joining us in Washington. Anderson, tell us where you are, what you're seeing.
We are being told to evacuate, actually, this location. This is where the line was for the last 12 hours or so. People here have been lining up, but as you can see, they have now evacuated the entire line. They're actually asking us to move on. We're the last people. That's all right. No one exactly has been told. Can you tell us at all what's going on?
Not right now, please.
Okay. They're saying they can't tell us what's going on, but this line was full. There were about 215 people here. The first person here came at 5 a.m. They had been waiting to line up to pay their respects to Ronald Reagan. Literally about a minute ago, this officer came screaming, "Everyone get back, get back." As you can see, the entire line has been evacuated. All the people have sort of spread out over here. At this point, we really don't know what's going on. We're trying to get a sense. They are simply just not saying.
Back to the street, please.
As you can see, we're trying to figure out what is going on here. We'll try to get some more information, come back to you, Wolf. But literally, this just happened some 1 minute ago.
All right, Anderson, stick around for a moment because I don't want to overly alarm our viewers out there. I know that they are evacuating people, reporters and individuals who have gathered in various parts of Capitol Hill, including up on Capitol Hill itself. This could be just a false alarm. It could be something serious. We obviously have no idea. We're trying to get some more information. But Paula, as we watch this unfold, clearly a very, very unscripted moment in what was supposed to be a very carefully choreographed, very solemn experience for all of us here in Washington.
Although there are also very carefully calibrated plans in place, in addition to the FBI being involved in the planning here and the ATF, there are as many as 4,000 local police who are also on duty, I am told, in that area from Constitution and 16th Street to where we just saw action near the rotunda.
Paula, let's bring in Jeff Greenfield. He's with us. He's our senior analyst. Professor Robert Dallek, the presidential historian, is with us as well. And once again, we want to caution, Jeff, our viewers out there. We don't know what is going on. I've been at many events in Washington where they think there may be some sort of, quote, bomb scare. It turns out to be nothing. That may be the case right now.
What this is really a measure of how times have changed. And when Lyndon Johnson had his state funeral, the only security, and this was 4 years after the assassinations of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, were the local police. We are in a 9/11 world. You remember the inaugural, where it was a massive national security event. They had metal detectors on the mall. That's right. And what makes this a little unsettling is that this event, unlike almost every other time we've gathered in the past, is really a celebration. Almost every time we cover something like this in the past, it's been for something bad. John Kennedy's death, Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy's death, the space shuttles, God knows 9/11, Oklahoma City. This one is the commemoration of a life well lived, a man who died in the fullness of his years, no sense of lost possibilities. We have to obviously keep an eye on what's going on. It may just be a bureaucratic order to the police to just clear it for reasons we don't know. But it does show you that there's a hair trigger here in Washington over the last generation that is very different from when I certainly arrived in this town several decades ago.
And of course, of enormous concern is what happens on Friday, when you're supposed to have the single largest gathering of foreign dignitaries in quite some time here in Washington, D.C.
Leaders from 170 or 180 countries, together with the entire leadership of the United States Congress, the diplomatic corps, certainly the Supreme Court justices, when they all gather in the National Cathedral to honor President Ronald Reagan. Professor Dallek, what goes through your mind at a little jittery moment like this one?
Yeah, I think Jeff's point is very well taken. That, you think back to the end of World War II when Franklin Roosevelt died, and you didn't have this kind of anxiety about any attacks on Washington or attacks in the United States. And even, as you said, the Kennedy death. And people were on edge because we didn't know, was there some kind of conspiracy that had taken the president's life? But yet, the amount of security was so much less than what one confronts now. So it is a troubling moment. It creates the feeling that 9/11, there's so many ramifications from it that continue to...
And a particularly troubling moment because we have so few details right now. But when you think about the amount of planning that has gone into this funeral, we know that Ronald Reagan himself, in the last year of his presidency, spent a great deal of time looking at specific details of how he wanted this carried out. And Nancy Reagan, of course, on almost, we're told, a yearly basis, reviewing those plans and updating them.
And let's just point out to our viewers that the presidential jetliner, if we can call it that, the 747 that is often used as Air Force One when there's a sitting president on board, is scheduled to arrive at Andrews Air Force Base outside of Washington, D.C. in suburban Maryland in about 20-25 minutes or so from now. It's been on a 4.5-hour journey from California, from Southern California, where the casket was picked up this morning. And that plane is supposed to land with Nancy Reagan, the children, other friends and family on board. But there is this little scare that we're now having up on Capitol Hill. I believe Anderson Cooper is back with us. Anderson, I don't know if you've gotten any more information. What exactly are you being told? What's going on?
Wolf, we were being told it was a false alarm. The police just announced that literally about 30 seconds ago. As you can see behind me now, the line is reforming. This whole line, it stretched about 200 people down there. As I said, many of them have been gathering all day. When police came, they rushed out. They said, everyone get back. Everyone sort of ran across to the opposite side of the street where they were waiting. The police just came now about a minute ago saying it was a false alarm. Everyone could come back. So slowly, the line seems to be reforming. By the way, everyone here has sort of gotten to know each other over the course of the day. So they're all sort of taking to spots that they have been in, some of them as long as dawn. We don't have any more information on exactly what the apparent threat was, but the police are saying here at least that it was a false alarm, and they have allowed people to come back here online, and the waiting continues.
Well, that's excellent news, obviously, not only for you and all of the people who have gathered there, but also excellent news for everyone watching our telecast right now. And I can only point out, Paula, as I'm sure you know, and I've lived in Washington now for 30 years, we get these false alarms, unfortunately, all of the time. But as Jeff Greenfield and Professor Delick point out, in the post-9/11 world, false alarms take on almost a new meaning.
And when you look at the kinds of screening processes you have to go through to get to the rotunda for any of the 250,000 people who may take the opportunity to do so, it's immense. You're going through magnetometers. You're not going to get anywhere close to the casket.
This is one of the little victories that the bad guys have won.
Yeah.
Coming to Washington, I worked on Capitol Hill for a year in the late 60s. There were no metal detectors. The security was non-existent. And it has imposed on all of us a kind of psychic cost that you hear a story, and what do? You play it safe. You evacuate a rope line. You drive the reporters out. It's one of the things that is more disheartening, I think, about the modern world, in that we feel, and understandably, that we have to live with this cloud over us, and it's a cost.
Paula, you mentioned that presidents lay out these plans to the last degree, the nth degree. The only one we know who doesn't have a plan for his funeral is Bill Clinton, and of course he's so young, but all the others do who are living presidents. But you can imagine how this may alter some of their plans in the future, because the kind of anxiety that enters into our thinking now about what do you do if there's a bomb threat, if somebody is calling in a false alarm. But the police, I guess, can't afford to be casual about this.
In this day and age here in Washington, even a silly threat, even something that no one takes all that seriously, has to be taken seriously, because you never know. It's the nature of the society in which we live right now. Our former Washington bureau chief, Frank Sesno, is with us as well. He's helping us better understand what's going on. Frank covered the Reagan administration here in Washington. Frank, I just want your quick thought on this false alarm. Thank God, this jittery nation in which we have right now. Thank God it's only a false alarm, but for a few seconds there, it got everybody very, very nervous.
Well, Wolf, we're going to be making a lot of historical parallels today and in the days ahead as we compare what was and what is, and we take measure of the man. In some ways, this era of terrorism that we're experiencing had its roots during the Reagan years. There was the Beirut bombing, there was Pan Am 103, but I remember when we used to go to work at the White House, all you had to do during the Reagan years is show your pass and walk in. Now there's a much more elaborate security procedure. I remember when there was talk of Libyan terrorists, and they put snipers on the rooftop of the White House because they didn't know who else might be out here. We recall it was Ronald Reagan who was told by the Secret Service that he should shut down Pennsylvania Avenue, and Ronald Reagan said, no way, you're not going to close Pennsylvania Avenue. This is the people's house, he used to refer to it. That's how he referred to it. And Pennsylvania Avenue has to stay open, and of course it's closed too. So as the late president returns to Washington, it's a different place, but in many ways it has its antecedents during his years in the White House as the world began to change.
Paula, I understand we're getting some additional information now on what may have caused this false alarm.
It's very preliminary information, but we are told that a private plane violated the airspace over that part of Washington, running from the Capitol to the White House. The airspace will actually be shut down for a period of time here this evening, and initial reports suggest it was a plane carrying the governor of Kentucky.
You know, this is all too common, unfortunately. As all of our viewers, I think, know by now, airspace over Washington, over the nation's capital, is highly restricted. There are routes where planes can go, but there's all the areas over the District of Columbia, basically, where the White House is, Capitol Hill is, all the monuments. No planes can go over there. And if a plane strays across, a private plane, that causes all sorts of things to unfold. It's almost like a chain reaction. You just have to get into that mode, and you have to think of the worst case scenario. And if this plane, unfortunately, managed to get into this restricted zone over the District of Columbia, that can clearly cause the kind of nervousness that we just saw, Jeff.
I'm going to make a little bit of an amusing turn here, Jeff, because I think you can reflect on this. David Stockman, who was the budget director for Ronald Reagan, told us a couple days on the air that because the airspace is closed off, that the current president can't use the excuse of the drone of the planes overhead when he doesn't want to answer reporters' questions. And he reminded us of the number of occasions where Ronald Reagan would not answer questions because there clearly was commercial air traffic over the White House.
But what Ronald Reagan also had, and what George W. Bush has, is the whirlybird. As he was going to the helicopter and Sam Donaldson would yell at him, Reagan would always cup a hand to his ear. He was very hard of hearing, and say, "I'm sorry, I just can't hear you." So I think they can still get the helicopter going, even if they can't have commercial airline traffic to disrupt it.
There will be planes flying over the nation's capital as part of this funeral service. Later today, there will be F-15s flying in formation in honor to pay tribute to the former president of the United States. It's a rare occurrence. They rehearsed it last night. 3,000, 5,000 feet. It was very, very spectacular. That will be coming up later. We're only about 15 minutes or so from the scheduled arrival of this presidential jet bringing the casket of Ronald Reagan to Washington. These are pictures. You're looking now on the left side. These are the pictures of Andrews Air Force Base outside Washington, D.C. in suburban Maryland, where we will shortly see this plane, this 747, this Boeing, coming in. All of the color guards, the honor guards are already in place, getting ready for an intricate, very detailed service that will take place with all the tradition and all the honor that is accorded a president of the United States who has passed away. Robert Dallek, give our viewers a sense of the historic importance of what we are about to see in the coming hours.
Yes. Well, it's going to mark a moment that people are going to remember. They remember, of course, they're not alive now, but in the history books you can read about Lincoln's funeral. It was such a telling moment. The country had passed through that Civil War. 620,000 people had been slaughtered, and the sense of tragedy in the country because Lincoln, another casualty of that conflict. Franklin Roosevelt, that moment when he died, was such a shock to the nation, and it's burned into people's memories. The train coming back from Warm Springs, Georgia, people standing by the tracks, crying, waving handkerchiefs as the train went by, because it went up to Hyde Park, New York. It did come first to Washington, his body lie in repose in the West Wing of the White House. But then he didn't have a state funeral. It went on to Hyde Park. The Kennedy funeral, everyone remembers.
1963.
Right, John Jr. saluting. Everyone remembers the
I have a question for you as the historian. Can you remember this much focus being given to the funeral of a man who has not been president for 15 years?
No. And I think, Jeff, what it speaks to is the continuing hold that the man has on the public's imagination. What it speaks to is, I think, that the country has been through such acrimonious politics over the last 4 years, the election of 2000, and the tensions which are in the air already over this current election. Reagan dies, people in a sense recapture the feeling of unity, of shared values, of an America that had a sense of pride. The pride is back, made in the USA. See, this is what Reagan, that's his main legacy, I think. This is what he stands for. This is what people are drawn to by his passing. Not a profound sense of grief. He was 93 years old when he died. But here we are honoring him. And your point is so well taken. Yeah, 15 years later, It's amazing.
And he was 93 years old, the 40th president. Paula, these pictures that we're seeing now, this is back here in the nation's capital. This is the west side of the Capitol. These stairs will eventually lead into the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol, and the casket of the former president will be brought up these stairs. But let's go back to Andrews Air Force Base outside of Washington. This is a working Air Force Base. It's an Air Force Base that is the home, of course, of the fleet of planes that we call Air Force One, Air Force Two. This special plane is designated SAM 28,000. It's a special air mission. It left about 4.5 hours ago from Point Mugu Naval Air Station in California, together with the casket, of course, Nancy Reagan, the children, Patty Davis, Ron Reagan, Michael Reagan, their spouses, and close personal family friends, including Merv Griffin, the entertainer, Charles Wick, the former head of the USIA, a very close friend of Mrs. Reagan.
And for those of you who were watching us about 10 minutes ago, you might have seen the spectacle of Anderson Cooper on camera delivering a live report at a time that an evacuation along the procession route came down. We have Kathleen Koch on the phone right now with some preliminary reporting on what led to that scare. Kathleen, what do we know?
Well, Paula, the airspace over Washington, D.C., obviously 9/11 is highly restricted. There were some areas that were off limits before, but especially at times like this, officers are very, very careful. And apparently a small aircraft went into this restricted area. The spokesman of the Federal Aviation Administration, Laura Brown, tells me that this plane just skirted the southwest edge of the restricted zone. They do have that. They're in contact with the pilot. They are talking with him right now. And authorities say they no longer view this person as a threat. But apparently for some period of time, this person was not in touch in the proper manner with airport authorities, and they had to evacuate.
Kathleen, can you hold on? Wolf,
yeah, I want to just tell our viewers, Kathleen, this is the plane carrying the casket of Ronald Reagan. It is now touched down, is about to touch down at Andrews Air Force Base, pretty much on schedule, maybe a few minutes early. It left about 5 minutes late. The pilot clearly made up that time in the 4.5-hour cross-country tour from Point Mugu Naval Air Station in California. It's now on the ground at Andrews Air Force Base, just outside Washington, D.C. And let's, Paula, briefly go through what we anticipate will now happen. This has been all very carefully worked out. Fortunately, that false alarm has now gone away and everything can go back as scheduled, as clearly worked out. Once this plane touches down and it's now on the ground, eventually it will pull up, it will stop. The party, the delegation will emerge from the front. The casket will be taken off from the rear.
And then the family members are expected to exit the plane along with some of their close friends, among those Merv Griffin, who had been friendly with the President and First Lady, starting off with their friendship in the early years of Hollywood together. Also on board Fred Ryan, who served in the White House virtually all 8 years. He was the director of scheduling and appointments. And Charles Wick, who ran the U.S. Information Agency during Reagan's presidency.
Jeff, as you look at this plane taxi now and come to a halt, getting ready for this next stage in this very, very carefully planned out series of events, what goes through your mind?
I'm thinking of one of the last times Ronald Reagan flew to Washington before Alzheimer's took him away. And it was such a classic Reagan moment. He'd come in for a fundraiser. And in speaking to the group, he said, you know, I flew into Washington tonight and it all looked the same. He said, there's the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, Dave Gergen in the White House, because Gergen had just gone to work with Clinton. And it was just a perfect way of Reagan putting a little needle in a former colleague of his who'd gone to the other side without in any way being snarky about it. There was no sneer on Ronald Reagan. And I remember that because shortly thereafter he was incapable of flying anywhere at all. There's something about this guy. He had a kind of a perfect pitch when it came to that kind of moment. He knew how to be politically tough, certainly when he got to be president and after, without stirring up bile. And I think Professor Dallek pointed out the acrimony in our political life today is so great that this actually brings that to mind to me.
Frank Cesno, as you watch these pictures, we see the hearse getting ready to accept the casket of Ronald Reagan, and you watch this plane, it's not Air Force One, but of course it's one of those Boeing 747s that is Air Force One once a sitting president is on board. What goes through your mind, Frank?
Oh, Reagan's relationship with his town. He's coming back for the last time. This is Washington's opportunity to say goodbye, and in a sense, his opportunity to say goodbye. And you know, he had a complex relationship with Washington. He used to deride this town. The puzzle palaces on the Potomac, he would say. The bureaucrats who would do the social engineering and the redistribution of wealth for the masses, he would quote them as saying. I recall interviewing him his second year in office, Wolf. The assassination attempt had taken place, and he was being very closely guarded. And he complained that even though he was fascinated by Washington, and of course he loved his job, he felt like a bird in a gilded cage here because everything was so carefully choreographed, security was so tight then, and what he really loved was something he could never find here, which was the great vast of expanse that he'd have on the ranch and the ability to move around. And yet he worked this town. He knew how to lean on Congress when that was necessary or talk right over its head to the American people. And he played that Air Force One shot that you see now like a violin, going up those steps and waving or coming down and dropping a one-liner that would have the effect of thoroughly intimidating or outmaneuvering his political opponents. So a very complicated relationship between this president, this man, and this town. He was not of it and by it, and he always said it was something he was just passing through.
You know, Frank, you will remember this. It was during the Reagan administration. They of course set the stage for the transition from the old Boeing 707s, which were Air Force One, to the Boeing 747s, which of course are now Air Force One. Yeah. He was hoping to be the first president to fly in this the 747. It didn't happen because Boeing got a little bit delayed in production. George Bush, President number 41, turned out to be the first president to use these new 747s. But you flew a number of times on the old and the new Air Force Ones to know how deeply excited every president is, including Ronald Reagan, to fly on Air Force One.
Yeah, and that first Air Force One was, by comparison to the 747s the president's flying now, pretty cramped quarters. He'd come back occasionally in the back. The press was there. We were crammed in with the Secret Service agents. We shared very little space. We had a couple of seats and a little table between us. It was like riding a cramped commuter train. No complaints because you were catbird seat to history, but there wasn't much running room. And there was always the bowl of jelly beans there because that was one of Reagan's trademarks. He loved traveling around in Air Force One. He loved the grandeur. It was part of the set. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way at all, but Reagan appreciated the camera, he appreciated the drama, and he played to that. I mentioned this the other day, I think when I was talking to Paula perhaps, but Michael Deaver, one of his image meisters, said his job was to light the president. The president used every aspect of the presidency around him to elevate himself in the office.
Frank, Paula here. I'm going to jump in and give our audience an idea about what is going to transpire here. We expect Mrs. Reagan to be among the first to leave the plane. She will be escorted by Major General Galen B. Jackman. He has been the man who has been by her side basically since we got the news that President Reagan had lost his life. He is the commanding general of the military district of Washington, and then we're going to see quite an elaborate ceremony unfold here with the use of honor guards and some really terrific patriotic music played by the U.S. Air Force Band. It's going to be short but beautiful.
It'll be Hail to the Chief, among other things, including My Country, 'Tis of Thee. All of us will be moved as we watch that, no doubt. Judy Woodruff is up on Capitol Hill as we watch this plane, Judy, taxi to a halt, and it should be momentarily. Give our viewers your sense of what is about to unfold.
Well, Wolf, I think it goes without saying, and everyone has been talking about this, that Washington has not seen the likes of this for more than 30 years. We are witnessing a moment in history, a moment when this city, which is hustle, bustle personified, a city where people fiercely protect their interest and lobby for the issues that matter most to them, all that is put aside. Politics is put aside while we pay respects and deep honor to this president who literally changed a generation, if not more, of American students of politics. I've talked to so many young people over the last few days who came up to me and said, I started paying attention to politics because of Ronald Reagan. Just a little while ago, I was talking with Tom DeLay, the majority leader of the House. He said, I got into politics. He said, I ran to be chairman of my precinct. He said, I was a businessman. I was running an he called it a bug business. It was, an insect removal. And he said, Ronald Reagan inspired me to get into politics. I'd been sitting around griping, and he was the one who gave me reason to get involved and to think that we could make a difference. So he changed, he inspired, and we now have a chance today and through this whole week to take note of him.
And shortly the door will open from Air Force One, what is normally Air Force One, not Air Force One today because the sitting president is not there. This U.S. Air Force jet, though, this 747, will open the front part and out will walk Mrs. Nancy Reagan. In the back, the casket will be removed and taken to this hearse that you see for the ceremony and then the drive to Washington.
Just a quick point about when this is Air Force One. This is a potent political weapon. When a president flies into a town, particularly a smaller town, and he brings Air Force One with them, the sitting congressman of his party will sometimes go 500 miles out of his way just to get on that plane so he can get off with the president. They give tours of Air Force One when it's parked at the tarmac, and if you particularly are a political supporter of the local party official, you get to go and see Air Force One. Every president knows how to use this plane both to magnify who he is and to win favors from congressmen, from senators, from local party officials. It's not just a transportation device.
President Reagan traveled more miles than any other president in this nation's history, and it's interesting to note that one of the planes he traveled in often has been mothballed, and it will be on display at his presidential library.
One little nugget, he traveled more than any other previous president. He had broken the record when he was the president, but Bill Clinton traveled a lot more than Ronald Reagan during the 8 years he was president of the United States. You see the front door is now open. The stairs will pull up as they always do, and out will walk Mrs. Nancy Reagan. She'll be accompanied by Major General Galen Jackman, the head of the U.S. Military Color Guard, the special protocol officer, if you will, who's been assigned to help her, Paula, every step of the way. The casket will be removed from the back. She and her children will walk out from the front. And we're told, Paula, that one of the most comforting things for Mrs. Reagan right now is knowing that Patty Davis and Michael Reagan and Ron Reagan, they're all there with her during these difficult moments.
And it has been quite a journey from this family when you think about the time of the diagnosis of Alzheimer's in President Reagan's life. It was at a time when there was what some people described as great family dysfunction. And Patty Davis has written in quite a poignant way about how this disease has brought their family together. It has not been an easy journey. Maureen Reagan was among the first in the family to openly solicit more funding for the Alzheimer's Association, and at a time when she was battling cancer, she spent more time trying to raise money for Alzheimer's than she did for cancer.
And unfortunately, her struggle with cancer ended a few years back, and she passed away. That was a very sad moment. We see now the color guard representing all branches of the U.S. military beginning to move in to carry the casket from the plane to the hearse. When you watch this, Professor Dalek, and you understand how this is all so carefully worked out, you have to appreciate the historic moment.
Yeah. What I think of, Wolf, is the moment when John Kennedy's body came back from Texas. The contrast to that is so striking here because that had been such a shattering moment in the country's history, and Jacqueline Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, who was the Attorney General, came rushing on the plane and went to Jackie Kennedy. That was a moment of terrible tragedy, and this is almost the moment of somehow completion, of triumph, rather than a sense of the tragic. So that's the other moment I think back to when a casket came off.
The circumstances surrounding the death of John F. Kennedy, obviously, the circumstances surrounding the death of President Reagan, so very, very different. You're watching this color guard begin to move. The hearse will pull into position near Air Force One. The honor cordon and the Army band will march into position. That's what we're seeing right now. And then the family will emerge and walk down those stairs.
And I guess the one thing that strikes me as we wait for Nancy Reagan to exit the plane is the enormous strain that this must be for her. Even though she was intimately involved in the planning of this, this is almost a week-long process in the end.
Let's listen in briefly and get a little flavor of what's happening. Casket is about to be lowered from this United States Air Force jet that has brought Ronald Reagan's body from California to the nation's capital for the next phase in this state funeral of the 40th President of the United States. Once the casket is lowered, then Mrs. Reagan will emerge together with her children and other close family friends who have made this long journey from California to pay tribute to this President of the United States who was so beloved. And here she is, Mrs. Reagan, being escorted by Major General Galen Jackman, who's been with her literally every moment since this ordeal began Saturday, right at around 1 p.m. Pacific time, when word came, official word, that Ronald Reagan was dead.
Although Mrs. Reagan has been quite open, at least in the couple weeks leading up to his death, that she felt his health was failing. And in an impassioned speech before a group of scientists and folks who are actively involved in the Alzheimer's community, she made her plea for more money for stem cell research, which of course is a highly controversial subject among some members of her party.
You know, Jeff, as we look at Mrs. Reagan, and we're going to watch this, and then once the official ceremony begins, we'll just be quiet and observe it together with all of our viewers. She's a very, very strong woman, even though she looks frail.
And in fact, that's exactly what I was reminded of. This is a woman who, while not having an independent career of her own the way Hillary Clinton certainly did, this was a very important person within the White House. She was said to have encouraged President Reagan on his negotiations with the Soviet Union to stress peace. She had a lot to say about personnel. People in the White House said that you crossed Nancy Reagan at your peril, that she was a fierce defender of her husband, like a lot of us. She was more offended by the criticism than he was.
As she continues on this stroll across the tarmac, Frank says, no, you got to know Mrs. Reagan, and you got to appreciate, as so many of our viewers did, so many Americans began to appreciate the love affair between her and the man she called Ronnie.
It was really remarkable. There was a sixth sense between them. Daughter Patty, whom you will see here shortly, has said that when the two of them were together, they almost sucked the air out of the room, and it wasn't a conscious thing, it just happened. When there was the assassination attempt on the president's life, Mrs. Reagan tells a powerful story about how even before she was told something happened, she was in the middle of lunch and she just had a sense, an intuition that something was wrong. When they told her that her husband, about the attempt, but that he was fine, they at first urged her not to go to the hospital. And she said, no, I'm going to the hospital if I have to run there myself. The president said some years later at a tribute in 1988, and I'm reading his words, what do you say about someone who gives your life meaning? What do you say about someone who's always there with support and understanding, someone who makes sacrifices so that your life will be easier and more successful?
Frank, I want our viewers to be able to listen in and to watch and to observe what is happening at Andrews Air Force Base right now. Let's listen.
Ready, step.
Gentlemen, order, on. Ready, pace. Ready, step. Hot.
You go in on the
Hot. 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 Hot.
And so there it is, the hearse carrying the casket of Ronald Reagan, leaving Andrews Air Force Base for the drive into the nation's capital. You see that on the right part of your screen, Paula. On the left part, Constitution Avenue in Washington, D.C. This hearse will be heading over to 16th and Constitution Avenue, where the casket will be transferred to a caisson for the continuing movement up to Capitol Hill. All very, very, very carefully worked out with arrangements by the military district of Washington, D.C. Major General Galen Jackman, who's with Mrs. Reagan inside the limousine. He's the commanding general of that unit.
Normally this trip would take about 15 to 20 minutes without traffic, but these processions, are, at least when they involve motorcades, move at about 20 miles per hour.
That's what they've required, that according to the protocol for a state funeral, once the motorcade begins and once they're off the Andrews Air Force Base, they can only travel at exactly 20 miles per hour.
So we're estimating it could take anywhere from 30 to 40 minutes for the hearse to reach that point at the ellipse where the transfer of the casket will be made to the caisson. The crowds have clearly filled in since the last time we saw that picture. It is a stifling hot day out there today.
Jeff?
Well, I'm just thinking this is a kind of playing the film backward of how a president usually begins his tenure. That is, he takes the oath of office now on the west front of the Capitol, and he rides, or increasingly in tradition, walks part of the route along Pennsylvania Avenue, winds up in front of the White House where the inaugural parade takes place. And there is something, even in this day and age of instant access and internet travel, there is something that really adds weight to the very traditional, literally thousands-year-old notion of a solemn pageant, of people simply walking before crowds. You can go back to ancient Greece, where some of these traditions, in Rome, where some of these traditions were born, and there is something about it, even, I think, for young people who never knew a world without computers and the internet, that this oldest of traditions still has tremendous meaning.
It speaks to our democratic traditions. Big Horse, you remember when Jimmy Carter became president after all the terrible events surrounding Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford, and Carter walked down Pennsylvania Avenue hand in hand with his wife, and the point was to show, I'm not afraid of anything, these are my people, I'm their president, and it expressed the fundamental democratic sentiments of the country. And I think the fact that you go so slow, 20 miles an hour, people have lined up. You don't want to whisk by them. You want to go slowly so that people can glimpse the limousine.
Look at the beautiful blue skies of of Washington, D.C. right now, overlooking the U.S. Capitol. Yes, it's hot. Yes, it's humid. But it's a beautiful, clear day, an appropriately beautiful, clear day. You see, Paula, that flag flying half-staff over the U.S. Capitol. This is the west side that our viewers are seeing now. That this is the area where that casket will be carried up those many, many stairs, eventually resulting in the rotunda. We should also point out to our viewers that we're not going to see the motorcade make its way down the Suitland Parkway into the District of Columbia, go back into Virginia, and then over the George Washington, into the George Washington Parkway, and then onto the Memorial Bridge. We're going to see only the tail end of that. That's at the request of the family, as well as the military and the security services, just as was the case in California on the route from the presidential library to the Naval Air Station. It was considered to be undignified, Paula, to have helicopters chasing a motorcade and to see that going along the route. Mrs. Reagan apparently didn't want that.
I think she was smart about that. It certainly would have taken away, I think, from the meaning of what we're seeing unfold here on the screen. I wanted to go back to, Bob, an idea that both you and Jeff were talking about a little bit earlier about, because this is, as Nancy Reagan called it, her husband's long good night. The nation, in a sense, has had 10 years to prepare for his ultimate passing. And I've really been struck by hearing people in crowds, particularly in California, young kids who waited with their parents for 14 hours in line. They had no idea what he did as a president, and it was important for them to be there to pay their homage.
I think there's always a moment like this when people want to be part of it. They understand, even if they don't know who Ronald Reagan was, if they're young enough, but they know that something important is going on. And a less serious matter, it's why people want to be part of parades. It's why people want to be touched. If you ever have seen any kind of procession go by, the crowd will always want to reach out and touch a candidate, or even someone who's simply marching. And in this case, people probably got enough of a sense, even kids, that this was a big deal. This was a serious event. An important person is passing. And I think that's part of what Professor Dallek was talking about, that why these motorcades go slow. People have a, as John McCain would have put it, want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And a presidential funeral is about as big as it can get.
Judy Woodruff is up on Capitol Hill. I want to bring her back. Judy, as we await this motorcade to now make its way out from Andrews Air Force Base into the District of Columbia, you were up on Capitol Hill when we had that brief scare. That false alarm, a small plane apparently had gone into restricted airspace over the District of Columbia and caused a chain of events to occur, evacuations. Everyone got very, very nervous. From your perspective, you were there. What happened?
Well, Wolf, it may have been a false alarm, but nobody knew that to begin with. And I can tell you, I had just gotten off the air and had briefly taken a walk down the hall and was coming back when one of our crew members came running up to me and said, They are evacuating people from the building. We've got to get out of here. Well, I came back out here to the balcony of the Cannon building so that I could see for myself what was going on. And I am sitting on the south side of the Capitol across Independence Avenue from the Capitol, and you could see people streaming off the grounds of the Capitol. There was a policeman who approached our location in the Cannon House Office building up on the second floor, and he was saying, "You've got to get out, you've got to get out." So I grabbed what little I could and went running behind everybody else down the stairs, poured out onto New Jersey Avenue, which intersects here with Independence Avenue, and all of us joined the throngs, literally, of people running. And I have to tell you, Wolf, you know, nobody knew what was going on. I yelled at a couple of policemen. I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "We don't know." Finally, one policeman grabbed me by the arm, and he said, "Lady, take off your shoes and run as fast as you can." And I said, "No, I'm fine." And he grabbed me and he said, "You've got to stop." He made me stop, take off my shoes, and he said, "Run as fast as you can, get away from here," which of course made all of us think maybe something was going on. We didn't know. It was probably 2 or 3 minutes after that. We had run maybe 3 blocks when the word came down that it was a scare, a false scare. We were told, I've just been told in the last few minutes, they think it was a VIP plane of some sort that did wander by mistake into this very, very secure airspace. But Wolf and Paula, I can tell you, if you didn't think this place was on a hair trigger, you know it is now, because they were moving, and they were moving fast to get everybody as far away and as fast as they could from the Capitol.
And Judy, everything though is right now, you can assure our viewers, totally back to normal.
Well, as best as we can tell, I will say that they've run the alarms again about 4 or 5 times since then. They've run alarms. I'm back on the balcony of the Cannon House Office building, again, right across Independence Avenue from the Capitol. They keep testing the alarms here, resetting them, we're told. They've also been testing the alarms in the Capitol building itself. But as far as we can tell, everything back to normal. And the reason I know that is there's now not only the security people, the press, there is a long line of people. I don't know if you can see it from your camera vantage point, of ordinary citizens who are already beginning to wind down down Independence Avenue to get into the Capitol to have an opportunity to pay their respects to President Reagan. This is extraordinary. You all have been saying it. We haven't seen the likes of this in decades in this town, and it's worth the time that we're giving it.
Judy Woodruff, thanks so much. We're going to check in with Bob Franken, who is down along Constitution. I'm not sure exactly what part you're observing, Bob. Were you even aware that evacuation had taken place?
You know, it was interesting. When it was occurring, the one thing I did not see was any tension on the part of the police. Of course, they all have on their earpieces, and I was able to stop a Secret Service agent who said that it did not look like there was anything, but of course they could not take any chances up at the Capitol. What we have seen in this location, which by the way is at 7th and Constitution, some 9 blocks down this normally heavily traveled street from where President Reagan procession is going to begin, and probably another 9 blocks to the Capitol. As you can see, the crowd, even in the heat, has been gathering throughout the days. What you are seeing over there is the steps of the National Archives building, which now is just a sea of people. And you will also see members of the United States Navy who are in effect forming an honor guard along the way here as they were spreading out. They did so to applause from the people who are here. Now, there are people from all over the country. There are people here with some very interesting stories. Reggie, I want to ask you now to come over here so we can talk to Judy Roll and her son Luke. Judy, why are you here?
Well, we're saddened by President Reagan's loss of him dying, and we decided that we would come out and show our respect to not only him as a president, but also to Nancy Reagan for all that she's done for our country.
But there's something special. There's some special reason you're here.
Yeah. Luke just finished the 4th grade, and in their Christian school they had to do a report on a president. And it just so happens that Luke got assigned to do President Reagan, and he really wanted to do it, and he read a book on it, and we know lots of information about President Reagan.
Okay, Luke, I want you to really hit us with some information here. Tell me what you want to tell us about Reagan.
Okay,
speak up.
President Ronald Reagan was born in Tamco, Illinois, and he was born in 1911. He was born in an apartment in Tamco, Illinois, above a bakery in the same apartment as his brother, Neil.
Mm-hmm.
And as he was growing up,
worked as a...
He worked as a lifeguard, and
What kind of grade did you get for this paper?
I got, for this paper I got 100, and then the oral report I got 98.
Well, let me ask you this. Now that you know so much about the president, what does it mean to you to be here so you'll get a chance to see him as he goes past?
Honorable.
Pardon? You're sad that he's...
Yeah,
and it must
we're
be
glad that you got to come, and our children were real happy to be able to come. My in-laws are here from Minnesota, and they've got to be here, and all of us. You know, we're just very happy to be able to come out and show our respect to a man that did so much for not only the individual, but for our country.
Witnesses to history,
yes.
And as you can all see, there are thousands of them here to witness the pomp and ceremony that has not really been a part of Washington ever since the death of Lyndon Johnson some 30 years ago. Again, funeral procession will be passing by us in the next hour or two. It'll be going toward the Capitol, where of course it'll be open for people to pay their respects before the final ceremonies here, then the return to California. Wolf?
All right, Bob Franken, up on Constitution Avenue in the District of Columbia. Jean Reserve is not very far away. She's at the ellipse where the hearse will eventually stop at 16th and Constitution, not far from the White House. Jean, what are you seeing? What are you hearing over there?
Well, of course, the hearse is not expected here for another half hour, but already some of the units are moving into place. Perhaps we can take a shot across the street. You can see that the color guard is already here waiting. And if you look a little bit further down Constitution Avenue, you might be able to make out some of the old guard army members who are sitting atop the black horses that will pull the caisson. From the vantage point where I'm standing, I can't see the caisson, but I understand that it is hitched on back of those horses. What will happen, the motorcade will arrive here. The first cars will pull up beyond where I am. Then the caisson will move up to this side of the roadway. After that, the hearse will come in and pull to the opposite side of the roadway, and the rest of the motorcade will pull in behind. Then the casket will be moved by military pallbearers from the hearse onto the caisson, which will then move on up Constitution Avenue. There are many military units that are being pre-positioned up beyond us on Constitution Avenue towards the Capitol. They will actually start to move before the transfer of the casket is completed. That way they will avoid any congestion, and when the caisson is ready to move, it will be able to. They had been holding the crowds here back. They'd been behind ropes on the sidewalk. About 45 minutes ago, they took those ropes down, and people surged forward. People very anxious to get a good vantage point to see this moment of history. They're now probably 10 deep all along here, but this is one of the prime viewing areas for this ceremony because we're here where people will actually see the casket being moved. They will see some of the pageantry. Nancy Reagan will be stepping out of her limousine to watch the transfer take place, and of course this will all be happening in the shadow of the White House where Ronald Reagan served as president for 8 years. That's what it looks like here right now. Wolf, Paula, back to you.
Jean, a quick question. The crowd that is near you, are they young? Are they old? Are they men? Are they women? Are they diverse? What does it look like?
It looks like a pretty mixed group. I'd say ethnically overwhelmingly white, but I'd say I've seen children here, I've seen middle-aged people here, I've seen older people here. Spoke to one man who said he'd been a volunteer in Ronald Reagan's first campaign. Another man who'd come here from Richmond, Virginia. He said, you know, I believed in this man and everything he said. I swore to myself years ago, no matter where I was when he died, I would come to Washington to see his funeral, and he has come here today. So I'd say a mixed group, but as I say, predominantly white. I'd say the median age in the group I'm looking at probably around 45 years of age or so, Wolf.
People who grew up, in effect, with Ronald Reagan, he had a tremendous impact on a lot of people, Paula, an impact that is really being felt this week.
And we've heard from a lot of those folks on the air this week. What I'm thinking about when you look at the proximity of the ellipse to the White House and the hearse ultimately being in the shadow of the White House, it's so interesting. In the late 90s, when Ronald Reagan's memory really started to fail him, we are told he never talked about the presidency, he didn't talk about his years in Hollywood, he didn't talk about his governorship. In fact, what he was focused in on were his early years in Illinois and the pride he took in saving 77 lives as a lifeguard. And I guess when people visited him in his office in Century City, he would tell them over and over again that there was a log where he used to make a little carved notch representing each life that he had saved as a lifeguard.
This is also the place, Dixon, Illinois, where a lot of people think his ingrained optimism was born. I mean, which seems odd. He was the son of an alcoholic shoe salesman, but a mother who kind of encouraged him to look on the bright side, and he somehow got the belief, not being raised in a bucolic, wonderful environment. If your dad is an alcoholic and comes home sometimes drunk, yet he always had this belief that there was something better. Kind of a classic American notion, was something better over the next hill. And that theme runs right through Ronald Reagan as a private citizen, as a writer about politics, as a governor, as a president, as an ex-president, the last speech he gave to the 1992 Republican Convention. And it is a line you can trace for literally decades, for like 60 years, from his childhood in Dixon, Illinois, right through to the most important person in the world.
Jeff,
and I just want to point out to our viewers what we're seeing. We're seeing representatives of the U.S. military. About 2,000 of them will be participating in the cortege, as it's called. That's the procession of mourners who will move up Constitution Avenue behind the caisson. They will be showing their respect for the former president of the United States, Professor Delic. We were talking about the roots of Ronald Reagan going back to that childhood in Illinois, and it's probably not unusual. As people get older, they remember better what happened when they were young than what happened a few years earlier. It's probably a pretty common experience.
Hey, Wolf, it's even happening to me.
Is that a good thing or bad thing, Bob?
I think I'm getting old. Picking about Jeff's point, I've puzzled over this question of where did this optimism come from? And part of it, I'm convinced, has to do with the period in which he grew up. His model in politics, in many ways, was Franklin Roosevelt. Roosevelt, of course, was the consummate optimist, the man who spoke in terms of a better America, who took on the heavy burdens of the Depression and World War II. And I think Reagan saw him, I know he saw him, as a heroic figure. And though he, of course, moved away from his New Deal liberal roots, we know that, and became a Republican conservative, still Roosevelt was a measuring rod for him. And that's why he goes back to this radio broadcast as president. He picks up on Roosevelt's fireside chats, and he remembers the effectiveness of Roosevelt as a leader. And I think this is a great model for him as president.
This is the classic Reagan optimism. Remember when he had colon cancer? When he recovered, a reporter said, well, how do you feel now that you've had cancer? And Reagan said, I didn't have cancer. The polyp had cancer. Oh. Now, you can say, well, that's kind of missing the point, but you can also say, if you want to know where a person gets that sense of looking on the brighter side, to me, that is like an emblematic statement.
And no one knows that better than Frank Sesno, who covered President Reagan while he was in office and has spent a great deal of time with Nancy Reagan since the president's retirement. Frank, did you ever discuss with Mrs. Reagan about the constancy of President Reagan's spirit and that unbelievable sense of optimism?
Yes, especially, and of course in these most recent years when he was suffering from his Alzheimer's disease, and she and others who were close to the family, and there were very few, because very few people had access to the president once he fell ill, talked about how he would carry on with his routine and even with his remarkable sense of humor, making jokes about his own situation, which is rather hard to believe, but people who were close to him say and swear that was the case. You know, Paula, we used to ask him in the final years of his administration, and he had a rough go there in that second term, the Iran-Contra scandal and some other things, high points too, with negotiations with the Soviets. We'd ask him, and we'd ask people around him, what about your legacy? What do you want your legacy to be? He wasn't very good at answering that, because he really didn't think about his legacy in the terms of a sort of calculating comment on history. But I found these words in his 1988 inaugural, his re-election, which ironically was delivered in the rotunda where he will now lie in state, because we had a day in January as cold as this day in June is hot. And he said, history is a ribbon always unfurling. It's a journey. And here's how he portrayed his sense of history in grand, heroic, bold strokes. A general falls to his knees in the hard snow of Valley Forge. A lonely president paces the darkened halls and ponders his struggle to preserve the Union. The men of the Alamo call out encouragement to each other. A settler pushes west and sings a song, and the song echoes out forever and fills the unknowing air. That's how he saw the sweep of American history and his role in it, this sort of very grand and heroic place. And he finally said in that speech, "Let history say of us, these were the golden years when the American Revolution was reborn." His revolution, the conservative Reagan Revolution.
Frank Sesno is watching all of this with us. What we're seeing, various aspects of the military units that will be part of the cortege, the procession down Constitution Avenue from 16th Street near the Ellipse, not far from the White House. Once the casket arrives, we anticipate that could be in 10, 15, 20 minutes, not exactly sure. We will get a glimpse at some point of the motorcade bringing the hearse, bringing Mrs. Reagan, bringing the other family members and friends to Washington, D.C. for this gathering. But there are huge crowds already on both sides, Paula, of Constitution Avenue, even though it's very hot, even though local law enforcement told people, you know, it's going to be crowded, there will be traffic jams, this is going to be a difficult time to stay in Washington. You may want to think about this, but you know what? Look at this picture. Look at how many people have decided they want to pay their respects to Ronald Reagan.
And this pretty much reflects what the planners found in California. They had trouble estimating how many people would ultimately come to the Presidential Library to pay their respects to the president, and we have heard widely varying estimates over the next 3-day period of what we'll see here in Washington. We're told anywhere from 115,000 people to 250,000 people will make their way to the rotunda.
I guess it shouldn't be that surprising that in this country, Professor Dallek, there are so many tens of thousands, let us say millions of Americans who truly loved Ronald Reagan.
And you know, well, when we were talking about do people remember him, you know, I have students 18, 19, 20 years of age. They don't remember him as president. But when I talk about presidents, the two presidents who seem to have captured their imagination are John Kennedy and Ronald Reagan. These have the greatest hold on them. Now, Roosevelt, of course, it's too far back for them, but Kennedy and Reagan, because they come across to the young people as heroic figures. And I think they're people to look up to, and young people need that. They want somebody they can think about in American life, in American politics, who makes them feel good about the country.
What was the magic of the connection President Reagan had, not only with his constituents in California in the beginning and later on with the nation as a whole?
I think it was two things. He did have a command of public language that we hadn't seen in a long time. One of the benefits of Ronald Reagan being as old as he was and having Roosevelt as a hero, he summoned language in a way that younger politicians didn't know how to do, because I think they were too frightened by focus groups and pollsters and media consultants. Reagan was his own best speechwriter. The second thing was he was talking about big things. He was talking about the moral superiority of the West. He was talking about individualism and how government had grown too big. Now, you can argue with the policies, you can argue even with the results, but I don't think there's any question, and I think historians, Professor Dallek, are coming around to this point of view, that in terms of political consequence, in terms of the shadow that a president casts, you've got Roosevelt, and then you've got Reagan. And I think that's one of the reasons why people who were barely born when Reagan was president still look and they say, oh, that's the guy who was around when the Cold War ended. Yeah, that's the guy who told Mr. Gorbachev to tear down that wall. That's also the guy, the first president, sitting president, to survive an assassination attempt, which I think added to the mystique.
What I'm struck by is when you ask people what they remember about presidency. Do they remember that Lyndon Johnson put across civil rights or Medicare?
Hold on one second, Professor Dallek. I want our viewers to see this is the motorcade, bringing the hearse, bringing the limousine, bringing the delegation into the nation's capital from Andrews Air Force Base. It's going at exactly 20 miles an hour. That's the requirement. This picture from the Suitland Parkway was a brief snapshot, and I'm sorry for interrupting, Professor Dallek. Go ahead and finish your thought as we watch and wait the arrival on Constitution Avenue of this motorcade.
Yeah, I was going to echo Jeff's point that people don't remember who passed Social Security or who passed Medicare or any particular major bill that, you know, lies 20, 30, 50 years in the past. What they remember is the president's rhetoric. If they had certain lines, some of Abraham Lincoln's speeches, Roosevelt, the only thing you have to fear is fear itself, you see. John Kennedy remembered for that line, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And I think Reagan carries that quality as well. And it's really striking. I think you're quite right on that.
It's interesting to me, though. It seems to me that it wasn't until fairly recently that this was a president who was given any credit at all for being detail-oriented. It wasn't until these books came out which examined his writings going way back before he ran for even the governorship of California, which showed that he did have a distinct vision, that he was issue-oriented.
A lot of his critics thought he was basically, partly because he was an actor, that somebody put the words in his mouth and he spoke them. And a book came out a couple of years ago called A Life in Letters, in which this editor, this author, went back and found the originals of Reagan's radio commentaries and newspaper articles from the 70s, after he left the governorship, which he wrote himself. And they were detailed and they were complex. Now, and it's true, I think, that as Reagan got on, particularly in the second term, he lost a step. That's the man.
And you know, Jeff, Professor Dallek Paula, we're going to get a lot more of this in the coming years. Over the weekend, when I was in Normandy for the 60th anniversary of D-Day, Doug Brinkley, Professor Doug Brinkley of the University of New Orleans, was there with me. He was recently at the Reagan Library in Simi Valley, California, and they let him take a look at the diaries, the daily handwritten diaries that Ronald Reagan kept during his 8 years as president, and he was so disciplined. Every single day he would sit down and write in his own words, not dictate, not make up or whatever, but in his own words he would write what happened on that day, how he felt about certain issues, certain people. Once these diaries are made available to historians like Doug Brinkley or Robert Dallek, this will be a minefield of new information.
It's the same with Dwight Eisenhower. People saw him in the 50s as someone who was run around the track by John Foster Dulles. In the 70s, we begin to get documents, materials, and there's a famous book called The Hidden Hand Presidency, in which we find out that Eisenhower was so on top of things and attentive and was the real leader in that administration. But we're picking up on this point. You know, it often takes 30, 40 years before we find out in any substantial way what a presidential administration was truly like, because the documentary record is closed. I'm working now on a study of Nixon and Kissinger, and it's amazing the material that's coming to hand.
We'll wait around for it. Keep on working. Let's check in with Anderson Cooper, who last time we checked in with him had just weathered a bit of a scare when there was an evacuation on Capitol Hill. He's standing at the point where we're beginning to see people lined up who will, I'm told, I guess starting at 9:30 tonight, perhaps get their first glimpse of the casket. Hi, Anderson.
Good afternoon, Paula. It is obviously a lot calmer than the last time I saw you here. That we did have a little bit of a security scare about 45 minutes to an hour ago. Police suddenly came, evacuated everybody from here, and the line stretches now. There are about 400 or 500 or so. It's a rough estimate. People waiting on line. Many of them have been waiting for 12 hours or so. You can see it stretches all the way down here. There are a number of media crews as well. The sun has gone down here somewhat, so it's a little bit cooler, but at the height of today, it was around 91, 92 degrees. Incredibly hot here, and yet there were people dressed in their suits. I saw one man in a three-piece wool suit who had been here since early this morning. I want to introduce you to the woman who is the lucky woman to be number one in line, Carol Williams. You came last night. You left your home at 11 o'clock in Chesterfield, Virginia. Why? Why did you come here?
Because I wanted to be able to pay my respects to a man who gave so much to America and taught us once again what our founding fathers thought America was about, and wanted to reinstill into the population those values.
Now you're the first person online. You got here what, 5 a.m.?
At 5 a.m.
Did you think you were going to be first online?
No, I came thinking, wow, I'm going to be late. I'm going to end up like all the way back. I'll be lucky if I make it through in the first 8 hours. And I got here and I was, pleasantly surprised, and thought we would be pleasantly surprised to be taking a nap.
You brought your daughter too, and your niece. Why them? I mean, they didn't even grow up when Reagan was president. They were probably born after Reagan?
I didn't grow up when Lincoln was around or Washington was around, but these were men who changed the course of history, and the sense of history that they were now being able to experience and be part of. One thing is to read it in a book or see it on TV at home watching you. Another thing is to be here and be part of history.
And as you file past that flag-draped casket, what's going to go through your mind?
I think the first thing that is going to go through my mind is congratulations, President Reagan. You're with Jesus. The second is going to be, hey, could you lean over and say hi to Jeff for me? And I think the second thought that's going to go through my mind, or that I've thought about all day, is, wow, you know, Mrs. Reagan has held up so beautifully, not just right now, but for 10 years she has never let us see her swag, never shown anything but concern and care and love for her husband. And, you know, like her husband, we didn't have to wonder what they had to say about their values or what they thought. Their actions spoke so loudly.
All right, Anderson Cooper is there. Unfortunately, we seem to have lost his microphone, but we were wrapping up with that woman. Anderson, will be getting back to you. Once again, we're looking at these live pictures. These military troops, they're part of the bands, the color guards, the honor guards. They're standing by for the arrival of the motorcade bringing the casket of Ronald Reagan to the nation's capital from Andrews Air Force Base. That was the last leg of this cross-country journey that began this morning at the Presidential Library, Simi Valley, California. Momentarily, we expect, Paula, to see some of that motorcade make its way down from the Suitland Parkway over across into Virginia, actually, and then the George Washington Parkway, where it will then come back across the Memorial Bridge. It's that spectacular shot where the Lincoln Memorial is, and you see Arlington National Cemetery behind the Memorial Bridge. It's one of those most beautiful shots in Washington, D.C. that's appropriate for this kind of motorcade coming into Washington.
Which reminds me of a story I read over the weekend when it talked about how, and I think it was actually something penned by Nancy Reagan, when she talked about the utter joy that the president took in living in Washington, and she described how he never took off from Washington without saying a silent prayer to himself, and that he'd look out and see the Washington Monument and the Jefferson Memorial, and it moved him.
Everything about this city, if you've lived here long enough, winds up moving so many people. Jeff, you don't live in Washington, D.C., but you understand why this is so important.
No, in fact, it's so much so that there's a kind of feeling when people write novels or make movies about Washington, there's always a scene where the protagonist walks to the Lincoln Memorial. Go back to Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, the great Jimmy Stewart movie, which Ronald Reagan was a huge fan of. And they bathe in the reflected glory of Abe Lincoln and Thomas Jefferson. And it's gotten almost to the point where it's a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. And that bridge you're talking about that we'll see in a few minutes, the Memorial Bridge.
Hold on one second. This is the Southwest Freeway that is going from the District of Columbia. It'll take the motorcade. This is the motorcade we're now seeing across into Virginia over the 14th Street Bridge. If our viewers are familiar with that, not far from Reagan National Airport, it will go within literally the shadow of the Pentagon and then over to the on the George Washington Parkway over to the Memorial Bridge. This motorcade traveling, we're told, at 20 miles an hour. Normally this motorcade would have been over at Constitution Avenue, Paula, some time ago, but obviously, according to the protocol, according to the tradition, the motorcade must travel at precisely 20 miles an hour. Let's watch it go through this location. There's the hearse, followed by the limousine carrying Mrs. Reagan.
I, the other night, tried to go through the 138-page document that governs how these state funerals are conducted, and it is as dense as it can be. It's not only setting out guidelines for the speed at which the motorcade moves, but so many other details. Bob, I know that you've studied over the years as well.
People don't realize, Professor Delic, how intricate and how detailed a state funeral is planned out.
Oh yeah, this is something that people tend to in the most thoughtful and self-conscious way, one might say. But I want to pick up on your point about the beauty of the city, Wolf. And one of the things I'm always struck by is the fact that it's not a city which is cluttered with presidential monuments. You know, we have only 4. Washington, then Lincoln, then Jefferson, and I put them in that order because that's the way they were constructed and opened, and now finally, only in recent years, Franklin Roosevelt. Only 4 presidents, 4 presidential monuments. But it's not a city which is cluttered with all these monuments so that people feel as if the space has been gobbled up by past presidents. The World War II Memorial had created such tension over the question of whether it would break the view on the mall. But it seems to have worked rather well.
Yeah, after almost 2 decades.
But look how long it took, 50 years to build the Roosevelt Memorial. Jefferson didn't get his until 1943. Lincoln didn't open until 1926.
I think there's a rule now. There's people pressing for a Reagan Memorial, and I think the rule is that, that you have to have been dead for 25 years before it can even be considered.
Exactly. That's right.
There's a lot of urging for all sorts of things involving Ronald Reagan right now, from a 10-cent coin to a $10 bill, a $20 bill, renaming the Pentagon, the Reagan Pentagon. I want to point out to our viewers that there already is a Reagan National Airport here in Washington, D.C. There already is a huge office building, a government office building called the Reagan Building. It's a big building, and with the exception of the Pentagon, it's the largest government building in Washington.
And one of the most expensive,
There's
right?
an irony. The man who vowed to cut the size and scope of the federal government has more bureaucrats working in the office with his name than any other president.
Coming back to the $10 debate, I understand the compromise that is being offered now. The Republicans pushing for Ronald Reagan to be on the $10 bill are being told by Democrats that they'd rather take the money that would cost to go through that process and earmark it for Alzheimer's research funding.
Well, that might be appropriate as well. That's a nice gesture. I want to also point out to our viewers, Paula, that this motorcade started off in Maryland, has entered the District of Columbia, is now about to cross into Virginia, and then will come back into the District of Columbia, which underscores the nature of our nation's capital, Professor Dallek. In Washington is between Virginia and Maryland, but it's all so close, it becomes one area.
Yeah, but of course, when we began with this, the idea was to have a capital which in a sense would be neutral, between North and South, positioned in a way that it wasn't going to be a separate state or a separate, and of course there's been a great fight and battle and argument over the years, do you make Washington D.C. a state? Now it's probably never going to happen because there is this continuing impulse to keep it as a kind of island in the middle of the 50 states we now have.
It's depressing, though, to the residents of Washington, D.C., Jeff, who have taxation without representation.
Yes, and this is where great moments of ceremony blend in with grubby politics. There is no way in the world that the Republican Party is going to give 2 more senators, certain Democratic senators, to the District of Columbia.
I think what we're seeing now is the motorcade beginning to approach Constitution. Actually, I'm told it's not it. It's another series of vehicles on Constitution Avenue. It looks, I'm not exactly sure what that is. It looks like some law enforcement vehicles. Here's the motorcade actually on the George Washington Parkway out in Virginia, the parkway that goes between Reagan National Airport and the Pentagon, continuing up all the way into Maryland from Virginia across along the Potomac River. This is a live picture, Paula, of the motorcade weaving its way from Maryland into the District of Columbia, into Virginia, and eventually back into Maryland. This is an area, by the way, not far away from Arlington National Cemetery, where President John F. Kennedy, of course, is buried.
And if this motorcade continues to go at the same speed we think it's going at now, which is about 20 miles per hour, it should reach that ellipse point at 16th and Constitution, where the casket will come out of the hearse and be transferred to a caisson. And then at that point, Mrs. Reagan's car will follow immediately behind the caisson up to the Capitol steps.
And this is Constitution Avenue, where that motorcade eventually will arrive. It's not all that far away. The drive from the George Washington Parkway over the Memorial Bridge into the District of Columbia is not very far. This is the Memorial Bridge now, and this is a live picture of the motorcade, the hearse carrying the casket of Ronald Reagan. You see the troops saluting on horseback. Let's just watch it move its way over the bridge into Washington.
We're not going to take it out by now.
And I want to welcome our international viewers from CNN International from around the world. People all over the world are now watching history unfold in the United States. It's been more than 30 years since there's been a state funeral in the United States, the last time for the late President Johnson, now for the late President Ronald Reagan. And to our viewers in the United States and around the world, you're looking at these live pictures of Constitution Avenue, where the motorcade carrying the casket is about to arrive, and it will stop on Constitution Avenue, Paula, and the casket will be removed and placed on a caisson for the final procession up to Capitol Hill.
This is a process that presidents are supposed to take a great deal of involvement in particular the last year of the office. There's this group called the Military District of Washington, which asks for very specific plans, and we know that Nancy Reagan has reviewed the plans on an annual basis since President Reagan signed off on them.
This is the motorcade that our viewers are seeing on Constitution Avenue. It has crossed the Memorial Bridge. It is now approaching 16th Street, the ellipse, not far from the White House, where it will stop. The casket will be removed from the hearse and begin the next leg of this journey to Capitol Hill. It's going to be momentarily before this happens.
And when that happens, I know that for a generation or two of us, that will bring back memories of the Kennedy funeral, because one of the most iconic memories that we all have of that is the casket on the caisson being drawn by the horses. It was black and white because that's the kind of television we had, which fitted the mood. Those muffled drums and that whole feeling of grief. It's a completely different kind of day. It's a completely different ceremony. But some events that stick in your mind are just naturally going to come back when you see anything resembling that.
It's a caisson, for our viewers who are not necessarily familiar with the history, is French for a chest packed with explosives that was in the olden days laid in the way of an enemy and exploded supposedly upon the enemy's approach. Historically, it was used to carry a 75 millimeter cannon, but it's now being used, Professor Dalek, in a traditional way to carry the casket on the final journey to Capitol Hill.
Yeah, this is a strong tradition. It goes with the whole business of a state funeral, and Lincoln and Lyndon Johnson had this, and certainly John Kennedy. Your memories of this, Jeff, are, I think, right on the mark. And the horse that we will see, and
the riderless horse.
The riderless horse with the boots in the stirrups, facing backward as if the president is sitting in that saddle and looking back toward the troops he's leading. And so it's really a poignant image that we carry of all these funerals.
And there it is. There's the caisson. There are the horses, the moving, bringing this caisson up on Constitution Avenue. Jean Meserve is right there. Jean, share with us what you're seeing.
Well, I'm seeing what you're seeing, largely that caisson, a 1918 construction originally built to haul howitzers around, has been re-outfitted in order to carry the very heavy coffins and caskets that it carries at Arlington National Cemetery. Now we're seeing the honor guard, the color guard move into place. Also, they've moved up the horse, the riderless horse. Sergeant York is his name. He's a standard-bred horse, once raced, but he was not very successful at that. He is all black, which is a rarity in these horses, so they moved him to this duty. We can see now the boots in his stirrups. These, we're told, are boots that Ronald Reagan used. He was a member of the U.S. Army Reserves, Horse Cavalry, and after he retired, he still favored wearing these military-style boots with nickel spurs. They were among his favorites to use at the ranch and also at Camp David. This is a pair that has been used at the Reagan Library.
That's a beautiful horse with the boots in reverse, I guess underscoring, Paula, that no longer will the commander-in-chief be a warrior, if you will. It's sort of symbolic that the boots have been put in reverse and no longer able to ride this horse. So we're going to watch all of this unfold, all this very, very dramatic history unfold. It's been very, very carefully planned out. One thing we should point out to our viewers, that once the casket is put upon that caisson, it will move methodically, slowly up in the procession to Capitol Hill, followed by the honor guard, the color guard, the marching bands, all of the procession very, very carefully designed to underscore the dignity of this very solemn event.
This also reminds us that the military traditions that underlie these kinds of events. It's not just the caisson, which was used to take artillery onto the field. Sergeant York, that was a great World War I American hero. We still, and there's Nancy Reagan right now.
Nancy Reagan, and she's with Major General Galen Jackman, who's the commander of the military unit in charge of this entire protocol. Let's listen in as she's applauded by the thousands who have gathered.
On occasion, you can hear out of the cacophony, "We love you, Mrs. Reagan." One of her assistants, Nancy Drake, has said what has been so comforting to the First Lady over the last several days has been the amount of support her family has gotten, the overt show of love for her husband.
Very much. This is good. This is good.
So on.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
And so there it is, the caisson carrying the casket of Ronald Reagan, literally in the shadow of the south lawn of the White House across from the ellipse. The caisson now on Pennsylvania Avenue, surrounded by representatives of all branches of the United States military. There are 6 horses that are saddled, which will take this caisson, Paula, up Constitution Avenue, but only riders on 3 sides, on 3 of the horses on the left side of this procession. This is a tradition that began when the horse-drawn artillery days, in the olden days when riders would only mount one side along the lines of this kind of caisson, which under older days would carry a howitzer or artillery, but now carrying a casket.
These horses have come from various caisson units in Illinois, Virginia, Texas, and Maryland. Once the caisson starts moving towards the Capitol, it'll be about a 1.5 mile route. And already, as Anderson Cooper reported a little bit earlier this evening, there are thousands of people already waiting in line to view the president's casket once the public viewing starts around 9:30 this evening. The one shot that has struck me so far was the shot of the riderless horse, and Nancy Reagan asked that the president's boots be inserted into those stirrups. And it reminded me a story that I heard just 2 nights ago from one of President Reagan's Secret Service agents, a man who served him for 17 years, most of that time obviously after he was out of office. And he talked about how they spent a lot of time riding on the ranch together, and there was a day where he didn't think the president mounted the horse very well, and he was shaken by that. And he went back to Mrs. Reagan at the ranch and said, "Mrs. Reagan, I think that should be the president's last ride." And she said to him, "I can't tell him that. You have to tell them that." So he tried to figure out how to break the news to the president. At this time, the president was already suffering from Alzheimer's. He found a time when the president was relaxing and reading by a fire at the ranch, and he approached him and he said, "Mr. President, you're such a supreme equestrian, and you had some problems out there today." And he said, "I think it would be a good idea if you stopped riding." And he said the president looked at him with this look of wisdom in his eyes, and he said, "I know, you're right." And he said from that point on, they never had another discussion about riding.
This horse is saddled with the reverse boots, as we've been pointing out in the stirrups, to symbolize that the warrior will never ride again. And by the way, the boots are Ronald Reagan's own riding boots, and that was the request of Nancy. Here is the procession beginning actually on Pennsylvania Avenue, and this process will continue for some time until it reaches Capitol Hill.
Ronald Reagan loved horseback riding. It's one of the most frequently seen moments. He used to say the best thing for the inside of a man is the outside of a horse. And it was one of his favorite activities. So there is a particularly appropriate symbol of this horse carrying the president's boots as they go down Pennsylvania Avenue.
And there's Mrs. Reagan. She's in the limousine. She's not walking. She's following this procession. Clearly encouraged. She's waving, as we can all see, to the crowd out there. She must be so moved by the huge crowds that have gathered along this procession.
It's been interesting to me to see how the perceptions of Nancy Reagan have changed since she left the White House with her husband. And I think there's such a great deal of compassion in this country for the amount of devotion she has shown her husband during this very long journey of his.
She was, as First Lady, a controversial figure. There were stories about that. She used to make fun of the notion that she spent money on China for the White House. Once Ronald Reagan became afflicted with Alzheimer's, and she struggled with that, she gave a very moving speech at, I think, the 96th Republican Convention, where she talked about Ronnie's very long goodbye. And I think no matter how you felt about the Reagans as political figures, no one can look at what she went through without seeing that devotion and that concern.
Let's listen in now to the sights and sounds of these dramatic moments as this procession moves down Constitution Avenue to Capitol Hill.
I'm about ending. I'm done. Okay. That's it.
This procession moving down Constitution Avenue towards Capitol Hill, representatives of all branches of the United States military participating on this extremely hot and very humid day in the nation's capital. We've already been receiving some reports that some of those troops, some of those military personnel already overcome by the heat, having to drop out themselves, getting some minor medical attention, Paula. But it is a hot Washington summer day.
92 degrees late this afternoon. Although the temperatures dropped just a couple of degrees, it is still so humid that it's just stifling out there. Let's go back to Gene Meserve, who was at the transfer point when the casket was taken out of the hearse and then put on the caisson. You, Gene, have had the opportunity to talk with a lot of the folks gathered there. What was the reaction to seeing this piece of history made?
Well, what was amazing to me, Paula, was to be in the middle of this throng of people. There were thousands around this location, and they were so silent. There was those occasional shouts to Nancy Reagan of "We love you, God bless you," but apart from that, the only thing you heard was the clicking of camera shutters. People were absolutely silent. You saw in the crowd a few American flags. You saw a few portraits of the president. There's one California flag that was suspended across the roadway. A few children being hoisted in the air to get a better view, but an incredible feeling of solemnity and respect. As you mentioned, as the procession drove off, Nancy Reagan waved at the crowd. I have to tell you that the members of the crowd were waving silently back at her. Paula?
And Jean, how are people bearing up in this heat? We've talked about some of the folks involved in the actual formal part of the procession have already been overcome by heat.
I have not seen any evidence of that here. It has been very hot, but there are a few shade trees. For a while, people were trying to cluster under them. I have not seen anybody overcome. They've tried to be very careful, I think, to provide water to many of the military and law enforcement personnel along the route here protectively. I will say that, they just recently had the World War II memorial dedication. That was a very elderly population, and a lot of planning went in there to the medical side of the event. They tried to take that into account here. They tried to have some water preposition at medical teams on the prowl so they could give assistance to people who might be overcome. But I haven't seen it right where I am right here.
All right, Jean, we'll come back to you a little bit later on. Well,
Judy Woodruff, Paula's up on Capitol Hill awaiting the arrival of this procession. Judy, as we all know, there will be a very dramatic moment as this procession winds up on Capitol Hill when there will be a flyover to symbolize once again the support, the honor, the dignity that this president deserves. Give our viewers a little flavor of what we can expect as it makes its way up to the rotunda where you are on Capitol Hill.
Wolf, you're absolutely right. There will be, in fact, there'll be a number of dramatic moments. One will be the flyover. This is a ceremony that has been worked literally minute by minute by minute, down to the seconds, no doubt. They are planning for the arrival of Mrs. Reagan in the limousine already. We have members of the Cabinet, Secretary of State Colin Powell and others arriving here at the Capitol. Former presidents are arriving here in the rotunda. The Chief Justice of the United States, William Rehnquist, other members of the Supreme Court. This will be a collection of the most powerful people in this country in the rotunda there for this ceremony that will take place at 7 o'clock Eastern. It is, again, carefully orchestrated. There will only be remarks from three people, from the President Pro Tem of the Senate, Ted Stevens. You're looking now at an overhead picture of the rotunda of the Capitol. This is where the President Ronald Reagan's casket will lie in state from this evening until Friday morning, when it will be taken to the National Cathedral here in Washington for the funeral services. But we will hear from Ted Stevens, the President Pro Tem of the Senate. We will hear from the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Dennis Hastert, and we will hear from Vice President Dick Cheney. We will not hear from President Bush. As all of us know, he is in Sea Island, Georgia, for the meeting of the Group of Eight, the summit that has been taking place the last few days on the Georgia coast. After we hear from each of those three, they will place a wreath at the casket. There will be a musical selection and a benediction, and then the service will be over. This will be a very brief service. The funeral on Friday will be longer. It will run, I believe, about an hour and a half. This service, again, bringing together the diplomatic corps, members of the Bush cabinet, the cabinet of this president, again, governors of the United States, Supreme Court justices, again, the most powerful people in the country coming together, Republicans and Democrats. Partisan politics is pushed aside for this week in order for everyone to pay respect and to honor the 40th president.
And as we look at this split picture, the picture of the procession bringing the casket of Ronald Reagan, Judy, up to Capitol Hill, where you are, I want to bring back Frank Sesno, who's watching all of this together with all of our viewers. Frank covered the Reagan administration. He's our former CNN Washington bureau chief. Frank, this is so vintage. Not only the pomp and circumstance the dignity of the U.S. government, the history of what's unfolding, but specifically what Nancy Reagan herself wanted.
Very much so. Both Mrs. Reagan and the former late president met with planners, and they signed off on all the details of this. And Mrs. Reagan has said that she and the president felt that this was fitting, that this was an important way to acknowledge the grandeur of the office and the passing of the president. And they were comfortable with these arrangements. This was not something that they felt was inappropriate or somehow ghoulish. As difficult as this long goodbye with Alzheimer's has been, this day has been one that has been long planned. I wouldn't diminish at all the difficulty that Mrs. Reagan faces, but every step of this is something the family was a part of.
And I'm sure, Frank, as you well know, this must bring so much comfort to Nancy Reagan and to her children and their family and friends, how the nation is pouring out their expressions of love for this president.
Well, yeah, and you see her in the back of the car waving. That, to me, is a haunting picture, because knowing how much this president was a part of her life, and especially when they were here in Washington, how must she feel now? How alone must she feel? That's really very powerful.
Jeff Greenfield, to our viewers not only in the United States but around the world who are watching right now, explain what is happening in an American perspective to people who may not necessarily appreciate the significance of this event.
Well, this actually might make more sense than some other American political traditions to international viewers, because they are going back to Washington for a final farewell. There have been presidents who have not wanted to go back to Washington. In Richard Nixon's case, I think the reason is fairly obvious. That was a place he left under mixed or muddled or disgraceful circumstances. But Harry Truman didn't go back to Washington. He decided to be buried in Independence. I think what this is about is that if you think about the Reagan presidency, they laid some pretty great store on restoring a certain sense of grandeur, particularly after the informal presidency of Jimmy Carter, the man who carried his own garment bags and was a very kind of blue jeans kind of guy. It was often said by Reagan's aides that he would not take his suit jacket off in the Oval Office because he felt it hurt the dignity. And so the fact that Mrs. Reagan wanted this kind of farewell with all of the pomp and majesty, for remember, a Washington outsider, a guy who often made fun of Washington, says something about, I think, about that as president, Reagan was committed to say, no, the grandeur and the gravitas of a president is something I'm going to embrace, even if my political position came from outside the nation's capital.
And yet he was also the first to admit that experience felt imprisoning at certain points of his presidency. And we met a young man that had developed a relationship with him during the presidency when the White House adopted a local school from the district, and he had this pen pal relationship with this young man, and this young man described the president coming to his house for dinner one night in a very rough part of the district and eating on television trays and eating a television dinner with his family, and how at home he was.
And I want our viewers to take a look at the right part of the screen. That's the Capitol Rotunda. And here's a word that many of us are only today beginning to understand what it means. It's a catafalque, which is a platform. What you're seeing is the platform where President Reagan's casket will rest while lying in state in the rotunda. The catafalque is made of rough pine boards, and it's covered with black cloth designed by Benjamin French. It was originally constructed in 1865 to support the casket of Abraham Lincoln. The catafalque has been used for all of those who have lain in state in the Capitol Rotunda, Professor Delic, since that time. We're watching the motorcade, Nancy Reagan's hand waving to the crowds as it moves up Constitution Avenue. But talk a little bit about this Capitol Rotunda catafalque.
Yeah, it goes back to Abraham Lincoln. There have been 27 people who've lain in state in that rotunda. The first one was Henry Clay in 1852, the great compromiser, the Speaker of the House, the Senator. Of course, this is before the Lincoln catafalque was constructed. But what it gets back to is this whole issue of how Europeans, we were talking about that before, may view this. See, they see this as our exercise in American majesty, royalty. See, we have no kings, no queens, no nobility, but our presidents, in a sense, fill that role. And this kind of ceremonial is familiar, I think, to Europeans. They don't find it so alien. They don't find it so exclusively American, though it does have particular American stamps to it, you see. Also, what I found interesting is Nancy Reagan, the crowd applauds her. She responds. See, the institution of First Lady is an important part of our history now, too. And this goes back to Eleanor Roosevelt, who really began the modern institution of First Lady. We know that famous story when she was told by Harry Truman, FDR's successor, that her husband had died. The president has died, he told her. And he said, "Is there anything, Mrs. Roosevelt, I can do for you?" And she replied, "Harry, is there anything I can do for you? You're the one in trouble now." But she was a large person. She created this, and Nancy Reagan fills that bill now, fills that role. And people applaud her the way they might applaud a president.
You know, let's listen in briefly as we see this honor guard moving up these steps, the west side of Capitol Hill. These are the steps where the casket will be carried. It will be a very, very beautiful ceremony as it's carried up these many, many stairs leading up to the rotunda. But as we watch this, let's listen into the music a little bit as these marching bands proceed up Constitution Avenue. This procession moving down Constitution Avenue towards Capitol Hill, the procession bringing the casket of Ronald Reagan, the 40th President of the United States, to the rotunda on Capitol Hill, where his body will lie in state tomorrow until Friday morning, when the formal state funeral will take place at the National Cathedral. In the coming moments, Paula, we will see a very, very dramatic flyover over the nation's capital. Normally, planes cannot enter this restricted airspace, but 21 U.S. military aircraft, F-15s, will fly over to underscore their support, their honoring of this President of the United States. It is about to happen.
And the Air Force describes it will look like a giant V. A single plane will fly the lead position, followed by 5 waves of 4 plane formations at 10-second intervals. And then what you'll see at the very end is the last part of the formation is one of the F-16s performing the missing man maneuver, where that aircraft will shoot straight up and leave the others behind.
A symbolic moment that someone is missing, in this particular case, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States. During this flyover, all of the local area airports, Reagan National Airport, which is not all that far away, Baltimore Washington International Airport, Dulles Airport out in suburban Virginia, all of these airports will have a hold on flights as these aircraft from the 4th Fighter Wing, Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in South Carolina, will participate. And one additional note, they will fly, Paula, at a very low altitude. It will have a chilling effect, perhaps 3,000 to 5,000 feet, as they fly over the nation's capital.
That's enough to make you tremble on the street.
When I got off the shuttle today, coming down to Washington, the pilot came after me and said, "I want you to know something." He said, "All of us," he said, maybe it was our military background, he said, "but we love Ronald Reagan." I mean, he was at pains to communicate that to me. It's certainly true, Reagan built up the military. He was a passionate advocate of a muscular foreign policy. So it may be even more symbolic for Reagan than even for some other presidents that a flyover by the members of the military would honor a president who was so committed to building up America's defense.
The military had a long tradition in this country of being nonpartisan. George Marshall, who was principal aide to Franklin Roosevelt during World War II, he would never laugh at Roosevelt's jokes, wouldn't respond to Roosevelt's jokes. He didn't want to be taken in by Roosevelt's politics and become partisan in any way. But Reagan, after the Vietnam War, after the painful experience of Vietnam, the military found Reagan a friend, a supporter. And they really became, I think, much more Republican since the end of that Vietnam War with the advent of Reagan.
Based on the solemnity of this crowd, I think about the only other thing we're going to hear other than the jets flying over at 3,000 feet will be a 21-gun salute, which will clearly pierce the noise barrier. And I'm sure Professor Dallek knows the answer to this question, but how they arrived at the magic number 21.
Oh.
I've got it right here in my Trivial Pursuit facts.
I can print this for you.
It's a very complicated formula. Ships typically had 7 cannons, and so as the ship would fire each cannon.
Here it comes. Here's the first wave. Let's watch this flyover over the nation's capital, pay tribute to Ronald Reagan. including the final aircraft in that missing man formation. Judy Woodruff, you were there. You were underneath that flyover. Tell our viewers what you saw.
Well, if I can tell you, as someone who's sitting on the balcony of the Cannon House office building just directly across the street from the Capitol, you could see how low those jets were and how closely they came. They were directly over the Capitol of the United States. There was one plane in the front, and then they were in groups of 4, and then finally, as you all have just said, the final group of 4, one plane missing in the middle. That plane shot straight up just as it approached the Capitol. The sound was deafening. And everyone, there are a lot of people gathered here on the ground, not as many as on Constitution Avenue. We are on the other side of the Capitol, but everyone was looking up into the sky, holding their hand up to their eyes, because the sun, of course, is pretty high up still at this point. It's almost 7 o'clock here in Washington, but it's early June, and the sun is up there, and people were looking.
You know, Judy, it was a 21 aircraft flyover, 21 being the number of honor, like a 21-gun salute. One historic footnote that I want Professor Dallek and our Jeff Greenfield to respond to. During the state funeral for President John F. Kennedy, he had a 50-jet flyover, one to represent each state. It underscores that individual families can change the rules whenever they want.
Yeah, there's no question, and Mrs. Reagan has had, I think, a very substantial impact on the way in which this funeral has been shaped, and the music that they choose, how they want to bury the president. The Reagan burial is going to be back in California. They're doing it at sunset. They're doing it at dusk. They've purposely committed themselves to that.
John Kennedy apparently at one point was thinking that, you know, he was 43 years old. I don't think he thought he would die in office, but I think the family after he died was thinking of perhaps taking his body by sea and burying him in Boston, because he was a man who loved the sea so much, and they ultimately decided no, he belongs in Arlington. So it is, as Professor
That was
Dallek
Jackie
says.
Kennedy who insisted that he be, and she wanted the eternal flame. She had aides find out about that eternal flame in Paris in order to have the same thing at the gravesite in Arlington for Kennedy.
And what we're seeing unfold on the right part of our screen now are the number of dignitaries that are showing up. Senator John Warner there, in advance of First Lady Nancy Reagan's arrival. The security, as you can imagine, intense. I'm picking Senator Trent Lott out of the crowd. Who else do you see there?
Rick Santorum is standing next to the senator from Pennsylvania, standing next to Senator John Warner. There are senators there, members of the House of Representatives. The Supreme Court justices are there, as is the diplomatic corps, the president's cabinet, and other invited guests. This motorcade getting very, very close to the west front of the U.S. Capitol. Jeff Greenfield, before we get to Jeff Greenfield, Judy Woodruff is up there. Judy, tell our viewers why they've decided to move the casket up these many stairs of the west front, because normally it would be the east front that's considered the main entrance to the U.S. Capitol.
Wolf, I'm going to have to take a guess here because I don't know the answer. Perhaps someone else does. My instinct tells me it has something to do with the fact that the sun is on that part of the Capitol, and that, you know, Mrs. Reagan has been very conscious this week of the setting sun. Her husband will be laid to rest as the sun sets over California, the state that he loved so much. And I'm guessing here that perhaps that was part of the reason.
Well, I'm going to let Professor Dallek answer the question. There are two reasons why they've decided on the west front, but go ahead, Professor.
One is because the east front is under construction and they can't do it at this time. The other is that the west front was where Reagan was inaugurated, and he did that on purpose because he wanted to face west, looking out toward California, and so it's appropriate that.
And even then, the west part of the Capitol accommodated bigger crowds.
Yes.
Which he was nodding to.
Exactly.
The downside of that, Jeff, is that there are hundreds and hundreds of stairs that these honor guard will have to carry what is probably a 600 or 700 pound casket up these stairs under very hot and difficult conditions.
One of the things that makes the military what it is that when they are told this is what is going to happen, they say, okay, we will make it happen. And in this case, Professor Dallek's exactly right. 1981, he was, I believe, the first president to be inaugurated on the West Front. He wanted to face his home of California. He wanted to face America, not Europe. This is a very important symbol, and it also symbolized a break from the past. He wanted to say this is a new kind of administration. And I think even if the East Front had not been under construction, they would have chosen this much more arduous path because it was exactly what Ronald Reagan did when he was president.
One of our producers was out during a rehearsal for this procession, and he talked about the number of times the military escorts will have to stop on the stairs because, as you were saying, well, the sheer weight of the casket.
Not only will they stop, right? Not only will they stop, but there will be a new team, a new crew that in effect will come in and continue carrying that casket up those stairs. Frank, I don't know if you were there on January 20th, 1981 on the West Front of the U.S. Capitol when Ronald Reagan was inaugurated, the 40th President of the United States. But if you weren't, I'll just share with you one of the reasons he wanted to be inaugurated there, and he was the first president to be inaugurated on the West Front, is because it could accommodate so many more people than on the East Front.
And one thing should be said about Ronald Reagan, this notion of his sense of timing and choreography. He has managed his goodbyes very carefully and very consciously. Quick story, when he and Mrs. Reagan left the White House for the last time, they climbed aboard Marine One, and they had the pilots circle around the White House. Famous story. The President turned to Mrs. Reagan and said, "There's our little bungalow down there." And then off they went, without much sentiment, without much more emotion than that, to move into the next phase of their life.
Is the extent to which Reagan took his impulse from Franklin Roosevelt, because FDR gets the nomination. He's governor of New York. He's in Albany. He's the first president to get on or nominee to get on a plane to fly to the convention in Chicago, where he gives a speech in which he talks about a New Deal. So you see the way Reagan understood Roosevelt was breaking precedent, moving in a new direction. Reagan does this also in 1981.
Well, we talked about his inauguration. We should probably point out that the flag that is used to cover the casket is the same flag that flew over the Capitol on January 20th, 1981, the day of that inauguration we've been talking about.
That was also the day, and this was no accident on the part of the Iranian government, that as Ronald Reagan was taking the oath of office, quite literally at that moment, they waited till he was president, and the hostages were being released as Reagan took office, which a lot of people, I think people unconsciously, maybe consciously, saw that as quite a happy augur, quite a good omen. New president, Americans released. And it was a day that not just the West Front setting showed a real break from the past. I mean, Ronald Reagan had a very good first day as president.
444 days that those Americans were held hostage in Tehran, coming to an end on January 20th, 1981, the day that Ronald Reagan was inaugurated. This procession about to wind up on Constitution Avenue. Once it stops, the casket will be carried by the honor guard up the stairs into the Capitol Rotunda, where dignitaries, of course, have already gathered. And that catafalque, as it's called, the platform, once again in the center of that rotunda, is where the casket will be placed, and tens of thousands of Americans and people from all over the world, if they happen to be in Washington, Paula, will be allowed to go up and pay their respects over the next 24 hours plus to this president.
And what they will see once they get there is the American flag placed to the northeast of the casket, the presidential flag to the southeast of the casket, and the stars of the flag will lie over the president's heart.
Part of the tradition is to keep track of the numbers of people who go by or past the casket. Wonderful anecdote about Lyndon Johnson, who when he died and his body lay in repose in the LBJ library, the director of the library, Harry Middleton, asked an aide to keep track of the numbers of people who went by the casket with a clicker. And the aide said to him, "Harry, why are you doing that?" And Middleton replied, "Because I know that somewhere, sometime, Lyndon's going to ask me." Well, it speaks volumes about LBJ's personality.
Certainly does.
Judy Woodruff is up on Capitol Hill. She's watching all of this. She's got a very good vantage point. She's at the Cannon House office building right next to the main part of the Capitol. Set the scene for us a little bit, Judy.
Well, Wolf, we believe we saw the car carrying Mrs. Reagan separated from the caisson and drive up Independence Avenue and pull in to this side of the Capitol just a few moments ago. We know that Mrs. Reagan is, the plan has been for her to be, I believe, standing at the head of the stairs to watch as her husband is carried up those stairs on the west front of the Capitol. But Wolf, this is, again, we can't emphasize enough how carefully planned every aspect of this is. I heard you all discussing what is going to happen once the ceremony begins inside. It is being called a state funeral, but this will be a shorter service than the service there will be on Friday. Even so, 800 people will be inside the rotunda in just a few minutes. They are, if not already that many in there. Every one of them a VIP, 65 or 70 of them people who are part of Mrs. Reagan's entourage. And we know that, again, the three speakers are the President Pro Tem of the Senate, Ted Stevens, the Senator from Alaska, Republican Senator from Alaska, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Dennis Hastert, a Republican from Illinois, and finally Vice President Dick Cheney, who will be speaking. Each of the three, Stevens, Hastert, and the Vice President, will place a wreath at the casket when they finish speaking. The stars on the American flag over the casket are going to be lying toward the east side, we are told. His feet, the president's feet, toward the west. The stars on the flag will be lying over the president's heart.
This case on getting very close to the bottom of the stairs on the west front of the U.S. Capitol, where the casket will be removed and carried up those stairs. I just want our viewers to also know that once the coffin is placed on that platform right in the middle of the rotunda, the coffin will be guarded around the clock by members of the U.S. Military Honor Guard. There will be 5 officers at any given time, one from each service, the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Air Force, and the Coast Guard, and they will rotate, they will change every half hour, every 30 minutes. A new honor guard will come in to guard this casket as it lies in state in the rotunda.
It's still fascinating to me, the level of detail that we're going to be looking at here, even in the climbing of the stairs. We're going to see a team shift 3 times to accommodate the heavy weight of this casket in this horrible heat, but they're going to climb 83 stairs, stop for a while, then the procession will climb an additional 33 stairs to the rotunda, enter the rotunda through the west door, 116 total stairs in all.
I have to admit to you, this brings back a particular memory. When Robert Kennedy was killed, I was a young, very junior aide on a staff, and the body lay in repose in St. Patrick's Cathedral, and we did half-hour honor guards, I mean, not military. And again, this is a very different kind of occasion. I keep coming back to the point that this is much more a commemoration and celebration of a life fully lived. No one will ever ask, gee, imagine what would have happened if Ronald Reagan had been able to fulfill his full term. He did, for good or ill. And we have an arc to judge. And it's in such sharp contrast to some other ceremonies here, particularly of President Kennedy. This is a day when you can, when for all the mourning that we talk about, you can actually say, all right, Ronald Reagan had his full run.
And there is the casket. It's about to go off the caisson. To the left of your screen, you see a riderless horse once again. To our viewers who may just be tuning in, that symbolizes the commander-in-chief. No longer there. The boots strapped backwards into the stirrups of that riderless horse. This is the scene from a